When did a cop decide, nope, not worth it, and to just sit this one out? My mum's ex-husband is a cop, and my brother asked him one time what he does when he's shooting radar and a sport bike flies by going like 100+ miles per hour. And he said, absolutely nothing, never gonna catch that guy. And he said most other officers do the same thing. This is the unwritten rule at my local county sheriff, you don't pursue sports bikes. It will only end in them gone or dead and the cops to blame by the public. There's a video posted about a decade ago of some Australian cops chasing a couple of offenders on foot. One of them is about to get nabbed, but then runs into croc-infested water. You can almost hear the cop thinking, yeah, nah, not worth it, as he stops at the edge of the water and watches the guy run away. Awesome footage. There was a known, violent, mentally ill person named Chop in the neighborhood I worked in. As a rookie, I got a call of a prowler cutting through someone's yard near a cemetery. It's very dark and foggy. I pulled up to the area, spoke with the caller, and she described Chop. Chop was known to sleep in the cemetery and wander about during the night. If left alone, he usually just went on his way. Well, being a rookie, I had to find this guy and see if he needed help or was a danger to the public. I was shining lights all around and I finally saw Chop standing next to the fence, with a hole in said fence leading into the cemetery. Chop is huge, by the way, both in height and breadth. I call for an additional unit, only to be told that backup was a way off. I exit the car, staying close to it, and I notice that Chop has a 40-ounce bottle in one hand and a box cutter in the other. I think to myself, well, if he attacks me, I'll probably have to shoot him. I announce myself, and Chop begins screaming, just starting at me with the rage of a psychotic. He then makes a fist and shatters the bottle he's holding in his hand, then proceeds to start muttering and just crawl through the hole in the fence into the cemetery. I got back into my car and pulled back in service. Angel dust is an ongoing problem in my city. It turns people into the Incredible Hulk, in which nothing works in taking them down, more or less. Once there was an undressed man in the middle of our busiest street with a broadsword. We literally had to circle him and shoot him with pepper spray, rubber bullets, beanbag bullets, and tase him at the same time to get him to drop said sword. On average, it takes 6 officers to arrest one man on angel dust if the man is angry. This guy took about 10 cops working together to arrest him. I sat in my squad car and sipped my coffee, as I've had many encounters with these users and I have my own battle scars. They say the only way to fight angel dust is with more angel dust. My god, there would be literally nothing worse than law enforcement officers turning into deranged super soldiers this way. Do not go taking this seriously because frankly, I don't want to be mulched into a wall by a cop who's decided he needs a little something something to get me for an unpaid free riding charge on my train. Oh, I remember one where I was the victim of the noper. A call came across the radio for an accident where both parties were now fighting and getting confrontational with the officer who had come on scene. So my partner and I rolled over, we got both parties separated, and it's obvious the one driver is DUI, so we hand her off to another officer to be arrested. And he proceeds to hand us the driver's passengers. 4 5 to 8-year-old girls and 1 full-on baby. I will never forgive that sneaky mother effer. So we arranged for another caretaker to come and get these little moppets and bundle them into the back of our car. Well, you'll be shocked to learn that the children of mothers who drive drunk are not the most well-behaved little angels. Plus, the baby just begun wailing at the top of its lungs. So my partner takes the baby and a bottle that he salvaged from the crash in an attempt to calm it. I'm in the driver's seat trying to separate 4 screaming monsters through a partition. Also, I don't know any names, so it was a lot of, Abigail? Is it Abigail? Stop pulling Sarah's hair? Zoe? Don't touch that taser, it's not a toy. And so on and so forth. At about this time, our supervisor rolls by the scene. He pulls up next to the car, takes one look at the baby snuggled quietly in my partner's arm as he coos to it, then turns to me as I'm trying to separate 2 ponytailed badges in iCarly shirts, damn near losing an eye in the process. I could physically see the nope pass across his face, and he drives by without a word. My trainee and I were sent on a self-deletion call. We get there, and this poor lady is screaming about her adult son, begging for help between sobs. We run into the house, and the guy is lying somewhat peacefully on his bed, with an empty prescription bottle beside him, prescribed 2 days ago. 50 pills all gone. Yeah, it's too late for him. Apparently the guy had some health issues and decided to check out by downing the entire bottle. The mum finds him hours later and rigor had already set in by the time we got there. As I'm inspecting the scene and trying to be delicate as I'm teaching my trainee, the mom insists on hovering right over her son, telling me to do whatever I have to do. Well, part of the job is to check all dead bodies for signs of foul play. By now, my partner has arrived, and I instruct my trainee to help my partner roll the guy over to check for other wounds or anything suspicious. Now, Mum is standing beside the bed. My partner and my trainee are trying to roll over a very stiff, and I'm standing by the foot of the bed. As the body rolls, the dead guy farts. Loudly. Epic toot, really. Before I could say anything, I learned what these guffs from a dead body smell like. Let me preface this by saying I've smelled horrible things in my career before. Disgusting houses, gross people covered in number 2, other deader people, and nothing compared to the dead guy butt blast. I gagged and very nearly threw up on the bed and ran out of the house. I refused to go in, as every time I got near the door I started gagging. The worst part was, I found it funny afterwards, and the poor mum was just walking around covering her face with a tissue she was simultaneously trying to wipe her eyes with and breathe through. I noped that and made my partner and trainee handle the gassy gentleman. In short, dead guy farts will haunt you. I was walking a footbeat alone when I was about to walk down a dimly lit alley. As I did, all I could see was our local skinhead and weirdo standing in the middle of the alley with nobody else around. He had on suspenders with spikes on them, a tank top and red pants that had a dozen or so chains attached from the belt to his lower pant cuffs. I watched him stand there as he spun back and forth so his chains would bounce against him and make a loud noise. He did that for several minutes without stopping to look around. I was like, nope, and I backed the F up and left. I was with my field training officer on what I think was my second week in training when we got a call for a self-deletion. It was in the middle of August in the south, and we arrive and park in front of the house. We step outside and immediately just smell death. This guy had strung himself up in a barn and decided to tell nobody about his plan to end things. So he's been marinating on the August heat for 2 weeks before somebody smelled him. We walk inside and my partner points out that 2 rats are eating chunks out of his eyes and tells me to get up there and shoo them away. I find a ladder nearby and grab a stick, and then I lose my balance and grab the nearest thing. It's this gentleman's rotting body, and apparently the weight of both of us couldn't be supported by the beam. So I land on my back and his entire bloated body lands on top of me and ruptures open from his stomach. I had his smell on me for what seemed like months, and ever since then I won't deal with crap like that anymore. In short, rotting body lands on top of me. Ugh. This was by far my biggest nope. Years ago, before I went to patrol, I worked as a CO at the local jail. It was common practice to strip search persons going into the main jail. This one person comes into the back. He's about 6'3" and weighs about 350 pounds. The procedure was to have them remove their undies, turn around facing away from the officer, and squat and cough. This would result in anything shoved up their butt to come out. There was this one story about a female and the projectile pill case that came out of her hoo-ha, but that's a whole different story. This one guy hands me his undies, and I swear they felt like they weighed 5 pounds. If you've never seen fat guy tighty-whities, they are quite large. However, this specific pair of undies was coated in pure number 2. It was like somebody had covered the entire backside of his undies with a 1/4 inch of crap and spread it over the undies. Mind you, I have these duty-covered decks in my hand and I'm holding them by the band in pure revulsion. This guy did his squat and cough. He could have had a private jet up his butt for all I knew because I was in my please do not throw up mode. Normally, we give soiled clothes to the trustees to be washed. I told the trustee that the underwear needed to be thrown out, and nope, he insisted that I give them back. I gave them back to this guy and he put them back on. Full-on gag reflex kicking into overdrive now. I just wanted this guy away from me. He put on his jail overalls and went into the back. He could have had a pound of smack hiding in the crap covering his undies for all I know, and I did not care. I get shivers down my spine thinking about it. I have seen some horrid stuff in my job, but that is the one that sticks with me. Well, that was a lovely read. I assume that this is why you switched to patrol jobs instead, where you only had to deal with people occasionally trying to kill you. If that's the case, thank you for simultaneously fulfilling the criteria and making me not want to live on this planet anymore. Well, I had the honor of sharing a nope experience with an officer. So a few years back, my teammates and I were heading home from a paintball tournament in Waukegan, Illinois. Waukegan isn't the safest of towns, but we felt comfortable enough to have the car windows down and enjoy the breeze after a long day of paintball combat. Traffic was heavy, so we were able to take in all the beauty that Waukegan had to offer. As our car begins to accelerate on a green light, my eye catches something out of the ordinary in my peripheral. In the middle of a field near a strip mall was a brown electrical pole. This particular pole had the great misfortune of being crapped on by a large, disheveled woman. A stream of doo-doo was bouncing off the pole as if it had a target on it. She did not give an F. I mean, she was projecting an F, but she was just doing it in full view of a strip mall and hundreds of cars. I'm still silent at this point. I couldn't possibly form a word. A teammate screams, "Is she crapping on a fricking pole?" And I'm staring in disbelief as a police car slowly rolls by in the opposite lane. The cop sees the woman, brakes sharply for a moment, then stoically looks forward and presses his nope pedal to get the F out of there. Thanks for the memories, Waukegan. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My father was a cop. His nope stories are as follows. There was a green herb dropout who was ditching class. Dad spotted him and gave chase. They hit the woods. Dad is not a fat cop and is catching up. In desperation, the kid shucks off his $300 black leather jacket. It's in my father's size. He stops, collects the jacket, and lets the idiot continue his terror-fueled sprint through palmettos and spiderwebs. And the second story, I forget this kid's offense, probably fighting or more green herb. Hot pursuit through the halls, up the stairs. The kid charges towards the second-story railing, and without a pause, soars over the edge. He hit the ground with a frickin' stuntman roll and came out of it running. Dad didn't even bother trying to find out who that kid was. In his words, "That was amazing. That mother fricker deserved freedom." Anytime a person had a dog in the car. Not because I was afraid of dogs, but because department policy dictated that after an arrest, the vehicle was to be towed and the only option is to send the animal to the pound. I was not going to be responsible for someone's pet getting euthanized so the city could have its revenue. I heard this one at work today. A colleague was offered a rock-paper-scissors contest to get out of a speeding ticket, and she won. I was part of a nope-out by two of the coolest cops I've ever met. This past winter in Minnesota, my friend and I were out drinking. One friend, Jack, proceeded to get blackout blotto and wanted to do snow angels in the middle of my university's academic mall. Two cops came by and asked if we had been drinking. We were all underage, and we admitted that we had. Instead of giving us a minor consumption ticket, they said they didn't want to disturb Jack, who'd made about a dozen or so snow angels and was oblivious to the fact that the police were there. Okay, I'm not a cop, but one night I was assigned to work the late shift at a grocery store. If things were slow, I'd sometimes chat with the security guard and hang out in the back room until a customer came in. Well, on this particular night, we're both just sitting back, chilling as usual when we hear the store's door open. I stand up and get ready to head to the cash register when I feel the guard grab my arm as he points to the monitor. This huge guy in a black vest had just stormed in and he looked absolutely furious. We stare at the monitor and see him head right to the kitchen utensils section. He grabs the biggest carving knife on the shelf and shoves it underneath his vest before heading back toward the door. At this point, I look at the security guard and he looks right back at me and says, "There is not a chance in hell I'm going out there, kid." This guy charged out the door with a knife, and that was that. We notified the police, but I don't know if he ever got caught. About 3 months ago, I was on foot chasing a guy for a burglary warrant. We were on the second floor of a sleazy motel running towards the dead end. I thought for sure I had him, but nope. He jumped right over the railing onto the blacktop, and without even so much as a slight stumble, he kept booking it through the parking lot. I stopped and just watched him run through the parking lot and down the street, and I said to myself, not even mad, that's just impressive. My 60-year-old uncle is a cop in Chicago, and he used to work beats in the crappy areas of the city. For whatever reason, I once asked him how many people he arrested for DUIs in a week. 0, he said. I was pleasantly surprised and asked him why that was. Is it the good public transport? DUIs becoming more stigmatized? No. He tells me, "I don't have time to arrest drunk drivers because of all the murders, unspeakable acts, and robberies we have to deal with. If I see someone driving drunk with a gat on their windshield, maybe then I'll pull them over." Honestly, this is sort of refreshing in one sense. In my home country, we had a real issue of police ignoring very serious crimes because they were laser-focused on speeding tickets and other finable offenses that made them or the city money. So although it's annoying that Barbara was risking everyone else's lives driving after one too many vodka tonics, it is a good thing that the cops were prioritizing the more serious crimes here. I used to stop this 17-year-old kid quite often and would always smell green herb in his car. After a while, I started smelling farts. From then on, it just wasn't worth stopping that little stinker. My dad is a cop, and just last week there was a large, shirtless black man on some sort of substances. Well, my dad's co-worker wanted to tackle him to the ground. Bad idea, because it was across the road from a school that was about to be let out. Well, a crowd was forming because it was mildly entertaining to watch this guy who was on some sort of hallucinogens. On the way in, the man pulled off his pants and out came the Black Mamba. Well, his colleague tackled the guy from around the waist. My dad said, "Screw it," and let his co-worker do the dirty work as that guy handcuffed him while his head was wrestling the dark sledgehammer. He wasn't going to get into that. My dad just didn't want any part of what was going down, and honestly, I can't blame him either. Also, on his first day on the force, his training officer tried to trick him into touching a dead guy's meat cleaver as well. Oof. I was a rookie, maybe 6 months out on the street, doing foot patrol in a very bad neighborhood. I walked down the street and heard a noise from the nearby alleyway. I walked down the alleyway and turned the corner where I see a man sitting there with a bottle in his hand. I walked up to him, asked him if he was alright, and he looked up at me. His face was full of weeping sores and boils, and his teeth were black and rotten. He looked up at me and said, "I have acquired immunodeficiency syndrome." "Okay," I said, "do you need to go to a hospital or can I call an ambulance for you?" "Do you want it? I can give it to you too if you want." I could not have gotten out of that alleyway faster. In short, a homeless guy wanted to give me acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. Nope. My tattoo artist told me about a guy on angel dust ripping the bolted chair from the floor, walking outside and proceeding to sit on it in the middle of the street. He thought the shop was too warm and wanted her to come outside to do his tattoo out there. The police got called and the guy got taken away. It was 2 a.m. I was a Baltimore patrolman just doing a standard drive-through of a poorly lit parking lot somewhere in West Baltimore. My partner says, "What the frick? Check this out." It was some pretty-faced drunk in a cheap suit effing some tight-dressed blonde on his car's hood. We hit him with the spotlight. The guy looks up from railing this broad, reaches down and holds up his badge. CID. Homicide. What a piece of crap. I work for the TSA. I would have liked to nope out of patting down the man who'd just peed his pants. There's no noping at the TSA, however. And for your information, I was wearing gloves, as is required, so at least there's that. My partner and I made a stop on a car coming out of an area full of clubs and bars. My partner walked up to the driver's side and I walked up to the passenger side of the vehicle. The passenger of the car was passed out cold in the front seat. My partner asked to see the driver's license, insurance and registration. The driver opened up the glove box and that's when the passenger opened her mouth and projectile hurled into said glove box and onto her friend's arm. I turned around and walked about 10 feet away from the car. I can't stand throw up. I didn't hear the conversation or see the rest of the spewing in the car, but apparently it got real ugly. That's what my partner told me anyway. I could see the look of disgust on his face while he watched the passenger just hurl her guts all over the front of the vehicle and the driver as well. I then saw the passenger door open and the passenger fall face first onto the pavement, covered in her own stomach contents and just laying there moaning. I yelled at my partner to tell the driver to get out of the car and take care of her friend. So while the driver was taking care of her friend, I got a little closer. The driver decided she needed to scoop some of the sludge out of the passenger seat before she puts the passenger back in the car. I was lucky enough to dodge the incoming chunks of nastiness. I just walked back towards the patrol vehicle and had a talk with my partner. He told me that the driver had a suspended driver's license and he thought she had been drinking as well, but he'd actually have to investigate to see if she was drunk. If we impounded the car or arrested the driver, we'd have to take the passenger for public intoxication. 2 girls in the back of our patrol vehicle covered in one person's throw-up, and my partner and I both agreed, no way. We told the driver to get home, drive safe, and obey every rule of the road, and that she was lucky she wasn't getting the car impounded, and that she wasn't going to jail this time. We drove away with lights and siren and didn't look back. Well, I think you're pretty crappy cops for bailing on your responsibilities like that, but can I say for certain that I would have wanted the world's most disgusting human fountain in my car? Not really. So you get bad karma, and because of your job you should have done it, but that judgment also comes with a "glad it wasn't me" qualifier. I was sent a domestic standby call for a mother who wanted to get her kids back from her ex-husband. Basically, this is a call where you stand by while the mother or a father of a child pick up their kid from the other parent to avoid an argument or worse. We knocked on the door of the father, and the man who answered had his shirt off, and tattooed across his chest was, "Life is for players, B-word." Now, mind you, these letters were gigantic. They weren't the tiny little writing sort. This guy was a monster. We kindly asked the good sir to bring his daughter to the front so the mother could take her home. Fortunately, he did agree, but all I could think was, how in the F are we going to tase this guy if he decides to go sideways? Anyway, the daughter was safe, and I now have a bottle opener that says, "Life is for players, B-arch," in memory of that guy. Foolproof plan to avoid being picked up for DUI? Make sure you drive with a dog at all times. Hide your firearms. Have a fart ready to go on cue, and try to keep your warrants below 5. Easy. Have you ever had a teacher so dumb that you questioned how they got their job? I had an older chemistry teacher in high school, probably about 50 or 60, that was just about oblivious to everything around him. Aside from just being totally disorganized in the order he taught things, so most of his lectures made no sense as we didn't have context as to what came before, here's just a general list of his escapades. Kids would be lighting up metal tongs on the Bunsen burners and fighting each other with them. One kid got a chest flap in his shirt. That was pretty funny to just flash the teacher throughout the lesson. Another kid would dump all of the chemicals he got hold of in a beaker in the far corner of the classroom after each experiment. The teacher was so inept at teaching that once on a test that he never really taught materials for, he was caught handing out random grades to all the students. He often did homework the same way, as some kids didn't even turn theirs in and would get A's and B's. I'm sure I'm missing some stuff, but that's the brunt of it. I'm not sure what happened to him, as that was my last class in my senior year. My history teacher told a class of future engineers that airplanes were only able to fly because they were built in a cross shape. You can imagine the laughter that ensued when they realized she wasn't joking. Oh, this one chemistry teacher my sophomore year. He knew the material, but he was so disorganized that it often seemed like he didn't. And when he assigned us labs, he often paid so little attention that people started messing with the equipment or chemicals. I had a chemical thrown in my hair at one point, it got so bad. The worst part was that the administration seemed to know how bad he was. They just threw us honors kids in his class and figured we'd be okay. And so many people struggled with the class that most of us ended up staying on the honors track with barely passing grades because they just called it a wash. My most memorable was my life skills teacher in Eastern Europe not so long after the Soviet Union fell. According to my teacher, you arrive in the bedroom because of temperature. Thus, rubbing your pee-pee and causing friction makes you splooge. Even as kids, we realized it was bullcrap. Humans enjoying the deed is apparently a myth, and it's a sin anyway. Allegedly, I've got good education by the world's standards. If that's true, I'm afraid to know how low the bar is set. You know, I had to take a lot of words out and switch in very juvenile things into the story to make it usable on the webinets, and honestly I have to wonder if more than half of our viewers actually understood it afterwards. Still, colour me educated that there are parts of Eastern Europe that are just as repressed about what goes on in adult bedrooms as some US red states and UK Christian schools. Holy frick, I have needed this outlet. I had a teacher for my freshman year of high school. Now I know every student hates a teacher, but this was different. She was a math teacher who accused everybody of cheating. I was in an honours class with my best friend and we were comparing answers on a packet that she had graded and passed back. He and I had similar answers, but different grades. For example, question 5. We'd both answer A, except he got it right and I didn't. We asked her why, and she just started screaming at us, accusing us of cheating, even though the paper was already passed back. And this was only one instance. She took students' papers away and trashed them for no reason, time over time. And she seemed to target my friend. My friend had all A's, a strict mother who wouldn't accept anything below a B, and he is in my eyes a genius. Our teacher treated him so crappy that he literally tried to self-delete because of the snowball effect of getting bad grades and his mum treating him badly. Not to mention, she thinks she's a wizard and threatened to get her wand out on us. She sat on 2 chairs because she was so large that one wasn't enough, and her students once made a petition to get rid of her. Took some entry history's GE course my first year of college. The first words out of the professor's mouth was, "I know this is an entry history course most of you are taking as a requirement for another field, but I'm going to make it so difficult, most if not all of you are going to fail and drop out." Yeah, nah. I walked out and signed up for a different history course to satisfy the requirement and got an A. Some professors say this on the first day to scare off lazy students, but don't actually follow through with the threat. I had one professor who said something similar on the first day. The next class, he looked around the room, took stock of how many students didn't show up and said, Yeah, this is a much more manageable class size, and smiled. Mine wasn't dumb per se, but she never liked to teach. She literally slept during lectures. She only gave tons of homework and didn't even teach how it was done. But when our principal used to come to check, she'd suddenly start acting like she was the best teacher ever so that she didn't get fired. That way, we couldn't even make any complaints. I'm so glad I finished school. I've had unbelievably bad teachers at least 5 times. I wouldn't call them dumb, just not professional enough. Substitutes don't count, I assume, but every English teacher I've had, except for one, didn't speak English properly. I'm in a French province of Canada, by the way. I always end up being praised for being bilingual, but you studied this in university, teacher. My 3rd English teacher once asked me to stay after class to read a letter she wrote for a retiring co-worker in English to check if there were any mistakes. That honestly made me laugh afterwards. We hardly learn anything in English most of the time. It's just French storytelling and talking. Good job. I have a math teacher who does this thing where if they forget to check homework or anything, they put a 0 in for it. So then my parents see it and I get in trouble for the teacher's stupid mistakes. I also had a teacher that said, medication can't help your ADHD, it's just an excuse. And I had to try my best not to simultaneously yell and laugh my butt off. My history teacher argued with me for about an hour. He was teaching us World War II history. He was saying that Japan never took part. That's the English education system in a nutshell, people. In my freshman year of high school, my chemistry teacher went on maternity leave, and a long-term sub was nothing short of an idiot. Not only did he not know half the material he needed to teach, he spent an entire 80-minute class period once lecturing us on why global warming isn't real. This year, during the first 2 months of the school year, my AP Calc teacher had to be on leave due to an injury. The replacement sub was a straight-up dumb moron. The guy didn't know what he was talking about, confused the living frick out of so many easy early concepts, and couldn't even do basic differentiation questions right. Add to that his daily rants about using online websites. His lecture is composed of showing us the textbook for 5 seconds on the projector. I was so confused in that class by the time the real teacher came back. Thankfully, she isn't an idiot, so I didn't fail out. But damn, that guy should not be a long-term sub. I had a French teacher that didn't speak French, and another that couldn't control the class, so she handed out French crossword puzzles and word searches. She was such a sweet, nice teacher, but that class was awful, and I was so glad when I got out of it. It was grade 7, so we were together for all subjects. The history teacher got fed up at the class failing his tests. They were a bit bullcrap, to be fair, asking for minute details instead of what impact they had, so he just started giving out answers for the test for you to memorize. Then when that didn't work, giving out the answers and having the option for open book tests for 60%. I had an English teacher who was absurdly sheltered and dumb. She was in her 60s, and I think she had no contact with the outside world. This was a college-level ESL, English as Second Language class. English is not my first language, but I was already fluent by then. She was teaching us business jargon one day, and she said, a multiplex was a cinema room with a screen on each wall. Yes, really. And you sat at a table and you could turn around and watch whatever movie you wanted. Predictably, everyone started talking at the same time and saying that wasn't how a multiplex worked, and she kept denying it. We asked her how you'd deal with different soundtracks and if you had to pay for 4 tickets, and she said she didn't know, that she'd never been to one, but that's how they worked. I guess you could wear headphones, thinking about it now. She got really mad and ended up walking out of the class. She complained to the dean and we all got told off for questioning a teacher. Yes, really. I tuned out her voice for the rest of the year and just read books. One of my first days at my new school, our Year 5 teacher was reading Treasure Island to us, and one of the characters had a saber-cut scar on his face. She said it was from a saber-toothed tiger. I piped up and said something like, "That's nonsense, saber-toothed tigers are extinct." Her response was, "Treasure Island was written a long time ago." Not a teenager, but my college history professor told us all American Indians were vegan because they understood that killing animals was wrong. You mean the ones that literally wear skin? Those are the ones, yeah. At the same college, I took part in an archaeological dig at a woodland Indian site. It was an old village site, so lots of menial everyday things were found, like pieces of pottery, hearthstones, grinding stones, fish hooks, and burned animal bones. Oh boy. Guys, as a history graduate, I'm frankly mortified at the poor showing from the world's history teachers on display in this video. I can only promise you that of the many I had in my high school and college years, there were only 1 or 2 bad eggs out of the batch of more than 20, and none of them acted on the same level of blatant speculation as some of these. History is cool, and people who graduate in it are smart and hot, I promise. Now let's read this next story. Oh, damn it. My history teacher doesn't believe in the moon landings. My 7th grade social studies teacher, public school in Indiana, asserted that Mahatma Gandhi was a Christian who converted from Islam. I didn't even bother to try and correct her. Crazy stuff like this came out of her mouth almost constantly, and I got sick of trying to address it because the principals didn't care either. She also had a large nativity scene on her desk that took up over a third of it. Welcome to Indiana, where incompetent teaching and religious proselytizing go hand in hand. I had a teacher in needlework. She was gone for literal months, and there were so few teachers in needlework in Sweden, so we had no substitute, and therefore we had no lessons that hour. One lesson she was here, and we did a test. Whatever score we got that test was our final grade, and I don't know why she's still teaching to this very day. My science teacher thought Galileo's telescope was a space telescope, and my chemistry teacher was so gosh darn clumsy she dropped a mercury container and spilled hydrochloric acid in my class. I heard she broke some other stuff and experiments went wrong. No one died or got seriously injured, but I don't know how she got that job, held it, or stayed alive. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Happens all the time where I go to school in a third world country because it's a school that doesn't pay teachers very well, meaning that we're always short on teachers, meaning we'll accept anybody to teach, even if they have no idea what they're teaching. So, we had one person who might have been a criminal or something because he changed his nationality and his name and came here to work even though our school doesn't pay him. Now he's left, probably on the run. Oh yeah, and don't get me started on the flat earther physics teacher. My Year 10 physics teacher. Physics was my weakest subject throughout school, so I tended to ask quite a few questions. I'd always try working it out by myself first, by using the 2 books we were given, but sometimes had to go ask the teacher because I just wasn't getting it. She'd always tell me to refer back to my book. What does the book say? Hold on, let me look in the book. How did you become a physics teacher if you can't explain anything without a book? It got to the point where I stopped asking her anything because she was zero help. My old German teacher was similar in that he'd never told us anything. He'd tell us the definition of a word like once, and then if I asked, he'd go, "We went over this earlier." It frickin' teed me off. He either got fired for being crap or quit because the rest of my class basically bullied him out. Recently, I found out he wasn't even an actual German teacher. He was a college math professor who apparently just happened to know German. The new teacher's fun, though. I had one that said sound traveled faster than light. Then they yelled at me when I tried to correct them. Once a teacher told us that if we were absent, we should just get the notes from another student, and then proceeded to make her notes in such a way that if we weren't present in class, we would not be able to understand them. She wouldn't explain them to us if we weren't there, and she just expected us to show up no matter what. Another teacher told a student that missing for funerals was irresponsible and that they should have planned the dates for it better. Like, Larry, that's not how that works. My art teacher in elementary. Whenever I'd draw something, I'd work my butt off. Then she'd give me crap about it lacking texture, shading, or that it wasn't round enough for her. Keep in mind, this is from kindergarten to 5th grade. It would get to the point where I was so frustrated that I was crying, and she wouldn't do anything. She was acting like she expects us to have college art skills. She was the same with my sister as well. I really hope she's not teaching anymore. What a cow she was. Old and cranky, too. Every history teacher I had didn't understand nor had a grasp on what they were teaching. We were just memorizing events. They'd be like, "In year X, the Magna Charta was signed." "What was it for, miss?" "Why did they need it, miss?" Followed by like 10 seconds of prevaricating and stupid face. My friend has a long-term sub. Said sub never actually teaches. Instead, she yells at the class and then just does the work. A lot of the kids have to go on Google and YouTube for help. Yes, my English teacher started teaching in our school this year, but she doesn't even speak the language, eh? She tries to teach complex grammar, she messes up every gosh darn time, and I just feel bad for most of my classmates who already have troubles with foreign languages. A little bit of context, I'm from the Philippines and English isn't the native language, but it's almost as widely used in the country. In fact, the Philippines is one of the countries who speak the language fluently along with native speakers. But oh god, I had this teacher who taught our English class in grade 10, but was almost always grammatically incorrect and spelled words wrong a lot of the time. I don't judge people who have a hard time constructing a sentence in the language, because as I've said, it wasn't the mother tongue, but actually teaching it? That should be a whole different level, man. Once, our top student at the time, who was a little more advanced than the rest of us, once contradicted her, but she got mad and so defensive that she shut him up and made him sit down. We researched the lesson and found out our classmate was right. I was so frustrated that year, and apparently news flew to the administration and she got transferred the next term. It was just so crappy that we had to endure a whole fricking year with her having not a single thing learned. There was this morbidly obese teacher that told us to run faster during recess. She was over 400 pounds and told us that we were slow. Me and my friends nicknamed her the Tin Can for no reason. She was fired 2 months later. I had the geometry teacher in 8th grade, who I had to teach how to construct parallelogram in front of class. On the same level, another teacher had to come teach my teacher that parabolas do in fact not come to a point like a Native American arrowhead. She was a last-minute long-term sub, but also fresh off her master's. Needless to say, she wasn't asked to return, and many did horribly that year. I ended up getting a tutor. She also gave us a bag of raisins for a Pi Day celebration. Like, okay? When I was 19 in university, my biology teacher, who had a PhD, refused to teach evolution because she was a creationist Christian. She was required to have an evolution lecture, so she had another professor come and give it. But she sat in the front, and if anyone asked a question, she'd glare at them. I do not know how she got a degree, let alone became a college professor. Okay, as bad as some of the humanities options have been so far, I can at least see some of them as being extreme examples of there being room for open interpretations within some of those specific subjects, however awful they happen to be. On the other hand, a freaking scientist just flat out telling you their entire field is wrong, having got their degree and job in it, is possibly even more mind-blowing. I had this one computer science teacher who had absolutely no idea what he was doing. We had to tell him what to do half the time as he'd be taking these long, roundabout ways of doing very simple things. I was showing my best friend something about India once, since I'm half Indian. My best friend wants to know a little more about it, then we came to religions and I showed him some of them and their symbols. In case you didn't know, the leader of the Third Reich adopted his main symbol from one of these symbols. Then one of our teachers came over and tells us to go away from all that fascist stuff, and I explained to her that it's just some Indian religions. And she answers, well, then there must have been a lot of fascists there. I've never wanted to speak to her since, and I'm glad we don't have her anymore. Our class usually likes the religion teacher, however one time he said he didn't believe in evolution because he doesn't identify with monkeys. Of course that's because through evolution we became a different species. My Year 10 Understanding the Human Body teacher. On the first day of class, he actually admitted that he was a physics teacher. I'm not saying that he was bad at physics, but I don't understand why he was teaching bio. We'd ask him questions about the material, and he'd usually say that he doesn't know. Most of the stuff he either got out of a textbook without explaining it thoroughly, or he'd Google it. The class average for the exams was about 55 or 60. My politics teacher was a frickin' joke. The only thing he did was giving us worksheets, which he got from the internet, probably for free, and while we tried to complete them, he was in the back of the class doing crap with his iPad. Most of the time, he didn't even know the correct answers to the worksheets. We had one test in this class, and it was about recent news. We should just watch the news to study. There was a fricking soccer question like, what was the score of this particular match? God, I got so mad. Thank goodness we only had this class once every 2 weeks for one semester. I hated that lazy piece of crap. Once we had a woman who was a supply teacher, I think. She tried to tap the touchscreen whiteboard in our classroom for some kind of presentation. This was a while ago. I was like 10, so I'm a bit hazy on the details. Except it wasn't a touchscreen whiteboard at all. It was a projected image on a whiteboard. She was just poking at a whiteboard and we all found it pathetic. I guess I have two. I had a cooking teacher who was a bit strange, and I didn't realize how messed up she was until thinking about high school in retrospect. There were some of the obligatory bad teacher things, like putting stuff on tests that we didn't learn, taking points off for little to no reason, weird traditions she did when she taught us recipes that we had to copy, even if it made the dish worse. But upon thinking back on it, the strangest standout was that she seemed to have a weird vendetta against disabled students. There was a kid in my class, let's call him Carl, who definitely had some mental setbacks. She'd accuse him of cheating on written parts of the tests, and when we'd do the practical exams, she insisted that she had to be his cooking partner so he didn't mess up the kitchen. But the worst of these sorts of offenses against Carl was when Carl was baking a cookie cake and got excited about the Batman logo he was making in the frosting on the cake. He was very vocal about how he was proud of his design coming along when the teacher came over and said, "Carl, cut that crap out," and took his frosting. His decoration was left half done and probably got points off for unfinished decoration. It was really messed up how she treated him. Then there was me. I was a type 1 diabetic, which for those of you who don't know is different from type 2 and can't be brought on by poor eating or weight. My body simply decides to attack my pancreas sometimes, so now I have to monitor my blood sugar levels to make sure I don't die. Type 1 is with you for life. It's incurable, and I have to wear machines on my body that help with management. Whenever I had to do anything related to my disability, the teacher would insist that I had to go into the back laundry room to do it, whether it was checking my blood sugar or giving myself insulin. I didn't think much of it at the time until now realizing it. I had an accommodation on my 504 saying I didn't have to leave the room. She also made an offhand comment to me about eating better and said that that would cure my diabetes. Thanks, I'll be sure to look into pancreas-repairing beets someday. So my other story is my 5th grade teacher, who to this day I'm convinced was a mass hallucination me and my other classmates had. She was a very small woman, smaller than some of the 5th graders she taught. Despite this, she'd do everything in her power to intimidate us, even if that meant climbing on her desk and screaming. One time she tried to give me a detention for leaning back in my chair. Not much more about that. Also during science lessons, she'd call simulations stimulations. The real kicker was that one time she accused a kid of having a messy desk. These were the ones that had little cubby holes underneath them, bigger than a drawer, and they were just kind of open. As a follow-up to this, she picked up the kid's desk without warning, tipped it and dumped all of his crap on the ground, tossed the deck to the side and yelled, "Clean it!" at the kid while pointing at the pile on the floor. I'm pretty sure the kid cried. I can't remember for sure though. In short, one of them was super prejudiced against the disabled, and another was a very angry halfling. What is the most shocking piece of clothing someone has worn to a job interview? A few years back, I had someone show up fresh out of the swimming pool. Hair wet, bathing suit and cover-up on, still wet. Hadn't taken the time to dry off. I went through the interview and a test simulation of the job with her. She actually did very well at the simulation. When I took her to see my boss that made the ultimate decision, he took one look and just said, no. Didn't ask about the simulation or anything, just no. And no, it wasn't a lifeguard position, it was for a small textile company that manufactures cleaning room supplies. In her defense, my boss was a complete C-word though. I have numerous stories about why he did and didn't hire someone after I did initial interview assessments. Homecoming dress. She knew she was supposed to dress up for the interview, and that was the nicest thing she had. I felt so bad, and she seemed incredibly embarrassed. It was her first real interview, and in the end I gave her credit for at least putting in the effort. For everyone asking, yes, she did get a job offer. The attire didn't factor in nearly as much as her coming in prepared, on time, and with questions. It really sucks being on the poor end of trying to dress nice, but you literally can't afford to. Over the past few months of thrifting, I've managed to piece together a really nice-looking suit for $5 shoes, $15 pants, an $8 jacket, and a $4 shirt, along with a $2 tie and $1 pair of socks. $35. I just had my first interview for a job for when I graduate college, and I was complimented at the interview on my outfit. It took forever finding a matching navy jacket and pants that both fit, but I eventually did because I can't afford a $200 suit. He came into the IT interview in polo, khakis, and aqua-colored Crocs with an anime maid blushing painted on one and lining up a sniper shot on the other. Oh, and he was late because security was concerned about his My Little Pony chain wallet. A pair of flesh-colored leggings that made her look as if she wasn't wearing pants at all, a sweatshirt that opened in the front that had been pulled to the side a bit to reveal a lacy camisole top. We work as therapists. No frickin' way she got that job. For more info, both her wig and glasses were askew. There was an odor somewhere between human and cat urine. And about halfway through, she asked if she could take a break because she left her car running to charge her phone. Well, I saw a guy come from the country club pool in an American flag tank top and swim trunks to the club's golf cart boy interview. He didn't get the job and then came back a week later in a full suit apologizing for his previous attire. Well, 2 of our 5 stories so far have swimming outfits involved for non-pool related jobs. And since we have another 15 to 20 minutes to fill, I'd wager we'll get at least one more by the end of the video. I worked in the US Senate a couple of years back. We were interviewing about a half dozen candidates for a pretty junior position. One of the interviewees was wearing a Harvard t-shirt, a Harvard jacket, and Harvard sweatpants. We were astounded. The first question my coworker asked was, did you go to Harvard? The guy did, and he handled the rest of the interview surprisingly well. He didn't get the job, but he did become a running joke in the office for a while. I guess he was trying to get a set bonus? Well, he forgot to wear his Harvard underwear, so the bonus didn't take effect, you see. My master's student came to defend his thesis barefoot because his slippers got wet. This was in Estonia. My best friend's husband tried to explain to her that defending his thesis in a t-shirt with a Star Trek quote on it was fine, paired with ripped jeans and dirty sneakers. He's a computer science major with a focus on security. She disagreed. She's an opera singer who holds degrees in music and fine arts and did her thesis defenses in ball gowns. She made him wear a sport coat, dress shirt, and nice pants, but didn't force a tie. His entire defense panel was wearing t-shirts, and one of them was barefoot the entire time. I was the person in question. This was 20 years ago, and I just moved to the city. I was 17, and I spent 3 weeks working as a hostess at Denny's. A friend asked if I wanted to go rollerblading, so I was strapped into my rollerblades and was wearing athletic wear. She then pulled up to her gym, had me walk in my rollerblades up to the second story where the daycare was, and told me that I was interviewing for the nanny job that she heard was available. I actually got the job because the woman who owned the gym was impressed that I could climb stairs in my rollerblades. I interviewed a young woman who wore a skirt so short I could actually see her underwear when she sat down. They were pink, by the way. I gave her feedback later that she should have worn a suit. This was for a business analyst role. Everyone else was wearing a suit. Saggy pants with whitey-tighty underwear. When he bent over to sign in at the desk, you could see his whole butt, but thankfully not his butthole. Pajamas. She was pulled out of bed and brought to me and my boss for an interview. She didn't know she was having it. After 5 minutes, we offered her a job and she actually turned out really well. Back when I was an hourly manager at Walmart, a guy came in with greasy hair, white t-shirt full of holes and sweatpants. And to top it all off, he looked like he was rocking a semi. Surprisingly, he didn't smell, and his clothes actually looked clean, so that was good? But still, I gave him a hard no. Unfortunately, the overnight assistant gave him the go-ahead, because he wasn't going to be on her shift and she thought it was hilarious. This guy was a frickin' nightmare. He wore that same outfit, now never washed, almost daily. He smelled like death, turds, and cumin. And he was crazy. We were finally able to fire him after he pulled out his pocket knife and cut his coworker. Thankfully, the cut didn't cause any real damage to the kid, but seriously, what the frick? I worked with a guy who applied to the local big city fire department. Apparently, all candidates had to submit a passport-type photo of themselves, although I failed to see how that's relevant. Diversity quotas, perhaps. Anyways, this guy was a gym nut and also sent a full head and torso of himself with no shirt on. When I asked him why, he replied, "So they know I'm not a twink." Well, it must have worked, as Twinkie is now a firefighter. One time I was having dinner in a restaurant and saw a young woman come up to the counter and ask for a job application. The employees gave her one and she sat down near me to fill it out. This was when I noticed she was wearing a cap with a huge devil's lettuce leaf on it. She finished it, returned it to the counter, and asked what the follow-up would be. The employee said, "We'll contact you in a few days for an interview, and when you come back, don't wear that hat. Go spend a day in court. You'll be amazed at how many people show up to the judge in their best green leaf or rebel flag t-shirts." I have one from just last month. This guy was coming in to interview for a financial advisor program. Everyone in our office dresses very professionally, and most people I interview are dressed in their best suits. This gentleman came in wearing a stained white dress shirt with a yellow-tinted white undershirt. I kind of forget what pants, but he had a neon green and black Joker belt. "Why so serious?" was written all over it with the Joker's face. He didn't loop said belt through the rest of his pants, so it was swaying around while he was walking. He also had very long, creepy fingernails that were dirty, and he kept rolling and rubbing his fingers together to get the dirt off subconsciously. The icing on the cake was that he coughed and snorted something up very loudly, then swallowed it and loudly commented, "Nice." Somehow, this guy aced our assessment and put together a great resume, but was just the exact opposite of professional in person. We're still not sure if he was just trying to mess with us, screw the interview, or if he was just that oblivious. I just assumed he was interviewing for someone else, like Ben Affleck in Good Will Hunting. Woo boy, the guy without pants. At my last job, I spent 10 months in 2017 on a research team doing statistical learning research for health informatics. It was a very large healthcare company, and they basically took almost a dozen of their PhD researchers from BI, R&D, and market dev, temporarily reassigned them to the new Center for Data Excellence. 2 of the PhDs were director or AVP level, so they got to bring a team member with them. My director brought me from market dev because of my background in mathematical modeling, but the other guy didn't really have anyone suitable in his department who he was free to bring along. So they posted the job and started interviewing. I'd do the pre-interview stuff with one of the junior PhDs and then the senior team members who come in. Anyway, 4 days into interviewing, we get one guy up on Skype for his interview, and he's way too close to the screen, like his laptop is up on his knees. We ask him to move the laptop back a bit, and he gives it up that he can't, because the lower part of his shirt has a huge, fresh coffee stain, and his pants are hanging on the adjacent wall. He had lost track of time and rushed home, and had spilled his coffee in his hurry. We told him, "No problem, we'll find a new time for you. The shirt might be a goner, but be sure to wash those pants in hot water right away." We actually hired that guy, and I think he's still there. Great guy. Folks, I like to think we can take positive lessons away from these videos sometimes, and this story just goes to show that if everything goes to crap, honesty is probably the best policy. It might not turn out as good as this particular case, but it's generally better than the consequences of being caught in a lie. Fellow I knew was the counselor at the unemployment center. He said he had to explain to one guy he was coaching for job interviews, "Don't wear the hat that says, 'Beer makes me smarter.'" A Hegao hoodie. I must be getting old. I had to head to Urban Dictionary to figure out what that meant. Late to the party, but I had a young guy come in one day who I think was clearly trying to not get the job. Like his dad gave him an ultimatum to get a job or get out kind of thing, and he was just going to do interviews to appease him. He had his hair in pigtails high on the sides of his head with wire threaded in them so they'd stick out. Black t-shirt that said the F word on it in giant white letters. Plaid schoolgirl-style skirt, rainbow tights, and 90s chunky club kid-style shoes. It wasn't so much the inappropriate clothing, it was more the action of uncrossing her legs very wide while wearing a short skirt. Meanwhile, never taking her eyes off mine. Yeah, she was an HR nightmare waiting to happen. A tight muscle shirt. It's great that you work out, big guy, but it's not a gym. Plus, he only worked his glamour muscles. He was thick around the middle. Dude, at least give the office a show. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I've never had to deal with inappropriate clothing at an interview before, but, and this is probably worse, I did have to try and explain away to elected officials and citizens at a public consultation why my engineering consultant we contracted out for a portion of developing that town's strategic plan showed up in a fricking Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops. The reason I gave was that he wanted to stand out and field as many questions as possible by sticking out like a sore thumb and seeming approachable. The real reason was that this was his last gig before retirement, so he had 0 Fs to give, and he had just signed his divorce papers that morning and spent the afternoon drinking at the hotel bar with his lawyer. Unfrickin' real. Nothing in his contract dictated anything about attire, since 99% of what he was paid to do was going to be done from his winter place in Arizona. He was only expected to show up to any public consultations. You'd better frickin' believe our standard contracts going forward included a clause about dress. Had a candidate come in for a recruiting role. She was young and beautiful, but she was wearing some of the tightest yoga pants ever. Nothing was left to the imagination. Her top looked very professional, though. I had the same thing happen. Young, attractive, yoga pants that seemed painted on, college hoodie. 2 out of the 5 people on her interview loop were women, one being a manager. And she absolutely aced the interview. Nobody said a frickin' thing about the yoga pants, and they hired her. A see-through shirt. I could make out the details of her bra. Right after that, a candidate came in with one eye in bright green shadow, liner and mascara, and the other eye completely free of makeup. Poor attention to detail. That was such a weird day. I actually got a job by showing up scruffy. At the time, I'd been working construction, trying to get back into office work. I saw a now hiring site and just wandered in and asked for an application. The person who handed me the application was nice and polite to my face, then told another coworker, "That guy has no chance showing up like that." The other coworker, who was my cousin, informed the HR manager, who called me to apologize and invited me for an interview. I didn't even know what had transpired until my cousin told me later, but I said, "Oh, no worries. I was just passing through, and obviously I'll be appropriately dressed if you hire me." I made sure I was properly cleaned up and dressed appropriately for the interview, got the job, and ended up working there for 5 years. Had they not made the stupid remark, I might not have been considered. I had an interview for an entry-level customer service position at a large company, showed to our interview 15 minutes late in Hello Kitty pajama bottoms, a matching backpack, a bright pink hoodie, and warm, fuzzy slippers. I didn't even bother with the interview as she was late, but that has to be one of the most unprofessional outfits I've seen in my hiring experience. The other I recall was a young woman interviewing for a customer service position at the airline I was at, in an extremely low-cut blouse and short skirt, all in black. Mentioned something during the interview about how she hadn't smoked green herb in a couple of weeks and wanted to make sure we knew that she wasn't high. I recently watched this train wreck happen. My boyfriend's second job had just hired several new people. My boyfriend and I were hanging out at his place for work after his shift was over, and we had the pleasure of witnessing an interview. Please note that this is a pretty casual place. All the workers there wear jeans and gym shoes or boots to work. Their uniform is a t-shirt with the company logo. Although sometimes the workers come in wearing a different, occasionally nicer top depending on if there is an event or something. The interviewee shows up wearing the tiniest, tightest, sparkliest party dress I've ever seen in my life. It barely covered the naughty bits of her chest. Her entire braless back was exposed, and when she sat down on the chair for her interview, her whole bare butt hit the chair because the dress couldn't physically stay over her bum while sitting. She was also wearing 6-inch heels. No offense meant towards working girls, truly, seeing as how my best friend was one for a bit, but she honest to God looked like she'd just walked in from the street corner. The only place that outfit would have been appropriate was in a bedroom. Really, I can't stress enough just how little clothing this lady was wearing. It was truly one of those situations where you knew you weren't supposed to stare, but you just couldn't look away. There were customers there at the time as well, and nearly all of them were staring at her in shock, the exception being a couple of men who were there with their wives. Those men were staring straight forward, wide-eyed, not daring to move their heads an inch lest their wives think they were looking. Like, it was a spectacle. Anyway, so the next day, boyfriend finds out they hired her. Apparently, the skeevy old owner of the place liked her resume after all. Hopefully she remembers to wear pants or at least undies when she starts. I worked for a high-end software development firm. We wore business casual and were fairly on the casual end of that. But one day someone showed up to the interview in a bright fluorescent orange oversized hoodie, cargo pants, and sandals. They did not get the job. Look man, it's really hard work turning a prison jumpsuit into any sort of outfit, and hoodie was the best they could do in the circumstances. I do wonder who they killed for the rest of that outfit though. I was a recruitment manager for a call center, and oh man, let me list a few. There was the 20-something-year-old strolling in sweatpants that said, "I smoke green herb 420" all over them. Literally. A t-shirt that said, "I hate work." A giant gold necklace that said the B word. Leggings with way too much camel toe. An exotic dancer who came to her interview straight from work. An old man who for some reason made holes in his shirt for his nips to be exposed. A Ninja Turtle set of pajamas. A man who actually wore decent clothing but then tried to take it off and lay like a plank on the lobby floor. When he went to the elevator, he burned off his buttons with a lighter. None of this is made up. What an experience. An extremely short dress, but I ended up hiring her because she had experience. Turned out she was pregnant and coming from school, and her husband had met her at the interview site so she could change clothes, and that's what he'd bought. She was so embarrassed, but didn't have time to go home and change into something else. She ended up being the best worker I'd ever hired. Don't judge a book by its cover. Well, I was the applicant, and I, a dude, had a lucky pink thong on under my pants for an interview. I got the job, and I'm definitely gonna wear it again. I have a story. I work at a hotel. One day, a young lady came in asking about a housekeeping job. Our executive housekeeper was still there, so I called her office and let her know she had a potential applicant. She said she had a moment, she'd be right over. She came out, took one glance at her, and told her we're not hiring. The lady left. The executive housekeeper then told me not to send anyone looking like that to her. I asked why. She said, "Did you look at her? The young lady was wearing very tight jeans with holes in them, and it was very obvious she wasn't wearing any undies since half her rear end was showing. She had on what looked like exotic dancer heels and was wearing a halter top so tight that it left nothing to the imagination." I work in a phone shop, salesman, and we had an open day hiring event where anyone could walk in and be interviewed. We were always desperate for staff because the turnover was insane due to the job being sold as a dream while it was actually more of a nightmare. Most people showed up in their smart or smart casual wear, stuff you'd expect for an interview, but one guy had some real BDE. From top to bottom it went ripped jeans, Che Guevara top, 2 sweatbands on his wrists, and the creme de la creme, a snapback cap with the phrase, F what you think, printed on it. What possessed this guy to think it was a good idea to wear a hat that literally calls out the interviewer's opinion of them? I'll never really know. All I do know, though, is that out of the 50 or so odd interviewees, this guy was miles above the rest in terms of how well he interviewed. As you'd imagine, he didn't get offered the job purely because of his clothing, proving that you should always at least make an effort, and don't wear a hat cussing the interviewer. I'd put in an application for my current job and was asked if I could come in and interview within a couple of hours. I was volunteering at a therapy stable in the summer heat when they called in. I told them that I wasn't at all dressed to impress, but I was willing to come in anyway. So I walked in there in yoga pants, a tank top and muck boots, sweaty and stinking of horses. I got the job. Back in ancient times when you still got an application, I walked into a Dillard's wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I went to customer service and asked for an application. An older, extremely well-dressed lady was there and she asked me if I owned a suit. I said, if you hire me, I'll get one. She said, go back to men's and get fitted. She was the area sales manager for women's shoes. At the time, and as far as I know still, Dillard's had a policy that women's shoes would have an attractive young man in a suit. Apparently I qualified as attractive. Her previous token had been transferred to a much larger store because he was so good at his job. Our store was kind of in the minor leagues and she needed to get a new live body male that day. The next not gargoyle who walked in was getting hired. I walked in and apparently wasn't a gargoyle, and the last thing she told me was, never come into the store in jeans again, not even on your day off. We were one step away from Disney in maintaining the fantasy. That low-cut dress. We could really see all of his chest hair. My lord, where to start? My favorite one first. A guy came in wearing a cap that had white snow and caviar on it. There was also a girl wearing Daisy Dukes, many track suits, football shirt guys, dirty suit guys, leggings that are far too stretched and almost clear on the bum women, short skirts, jeans, and the list goes on. I had a candidate show up to the interview shirtless. When I worked in retail sales, I remember a guy walking in, saluting me with an odd level of enthusiasm, telling me he had just gotten out of the service and asked for an application. He was also drunk off his mind and smelled like BO and gin. He did not get an interview. I had a man show up in a very dirty, badly ripped pair of jeans and a tattered baseball cap. He'd also decided to dye his hair pumpkin orange and pull it through the back hole of the cap. No ponytail, just contained by the open hole on the cap. A guy in a Harley t-shirt came by applying for a job. What was so special was his Harley hat and the half-smoked and buttered-out cigarette he had behind his ear. I actually thought it was a practical joke or something. People who survived an attack on their lives, what's your story? I was outside in my garage petting my cat. It was November, so it was already dark by 5 p.m. Someone opened the door behind me without me hearing, grabbed me by my ponytail and started dragging me outside. They hit me on the head with a brick and knocked me out. Pulled me halfway around my house. I'm guessing this is when they stabbed me on the left side of my stomach. This must have brought me out of the daze because my mum said she heard me scream from inside where she and my brother and sister were in the kitchen. They came out the front door and saw me bleeding out on the sidewalk and called 911. I had 12 stitches, double layer, a severe concussion and whiplash. I didn't eat and hardly slept for a week. They never found them. I was riding a train across Eastern Europe. I was running low on money, and even though I'd been warned that a woman should not travel alone in second-class seating, I didn't spring for first class. I was sitting alone in one of the compartments that seats 6. This was also a mistake and a very stupid one to sit alone. Eventually, the train stopped and a man got on. He was very drunk. He came into my compartment and I guess he thought that I looked like his ex-wife. He attacked me. If it weren't for the fact that this particular station was at the border between 2 countries, I'd be dead. Instead, border patrol from both countries were on the train, and while I was unable to scream, the door was open and at least a half-dozen uniformed men jumped in and saved me. I was in the hospital for a bit, but I recovered. At one point during the trial, one of the cops asked me if I wanted him and his buddies to hold down the guy while I hit him. I thought he was joking, so I said no, go ahead, you do it. I was also joking, but it turns out they took it seriously and were about to. I did put a stop to that at least, but they were so offended that someone from their country would attack a young female American tourist. They were furious with him. So many people there depended on tourism. My sister had this one friend when we were growing up. I always got a bad vibe from them. She'd try to pick on my little brother, but I'd always stop her. Once we were at a lake and all the kids were swimming. I swam out into the deep roped-off part, but I was still little and really shouldn't have. She kept acting weird and getting close to me, making this weird laugh. She pushed me off the wooden pole in the water, and I got scared and started to swim back, but she came up behind me and pushed me under. It didn't click at first that she was trying to drown me, but after she aggressively pushed me under the third time, I had this crazy moment of clarity. It was like the world slowed down ever so briefly. I relaxed and let myself sink, swam underneath her, and came up behind her. I grabbed her hair and shoved her face into the water, keeping my legs on her back so her body couldn't rise. I waited until her struggling slowed down a little and then let her come back up. I waited in the water, saying nothing, bracing myself for her retaliation, but she just looked panicked and swam back to shore. I told my sister, who'd already expressed that the girl was weird. We confronted her together and she just looked really dazed. In a monotone voice, she just said, "I'm sorry, I didn't know it would be like that." It wasn't until I replayed those words in my mind later that I realized what she was saying was, "Sorry I tried to drown you." It wasn't until I almost drowned myself that I realized how horrible it is to do it to someone else. My God. Well, I can't wish that all crazy kids would have to have the same lesson put on them in order to teach them some empathy, but I'm glad she got some without a much more tragic end for anyone. I was exiting a bar once after last call and was with a friend who was a medic. We saw a girl laying in a snowbank near a telephone pole who'd just been hit by a car. We ran over and tried to help her, and some others were already on the phone with 911, and I, not having had any medical training, didn't have anything to contribute, but didn't want to just leave. The whole situation was concerning. I turned around for 1 second and started to hear people screaming. I turned back around and a minivan was heading straight for us, the few people around this woman. They'd already started to run, but I was too late. They hit me as I was trying to flee. Then they put the car in the reverse, ran over me again, and then went forward and ran over me a third time. Turns out the guy was high and drunk and got into a fight with the woman's boyfriend, whom I bared a passing resemblance to. He thought I was that guy. Not to throw a pity party for myself, but 9 years later I have a ton of medical issues and my life pretty much started on a downward spiral since then. But sure, I guess I survived. For everyone wondering about the guy, an off-duty cop watched the whole thing go down and copied his license plate number. He was apprehended 20 minutes later and charged with attempted murder, along with many other things. He pled out to just 3 years in jail. He had actually killed someone else a few years before drunk driving. How they thought this was appropriate is beyond me. My husband and I live above our place of business. Our alarm company called us at 3 a.m. to say there was a motion detecting alert, just one in a weird place. We assumed it was a mouse, but went to reset it and check it out. My husband ended up face-to-face with a burglar who was on his way out of the window he'd broken. He ran back inside, I called 911, and we heard mad chaos going on in the depths of the building. So much crashing and smashing. The burglar monkey climbed a 10-foot iron gate, bodily smashed through 2 sets of commercial-grade glass doors and was outside again. My husband was like, "Yeah, frick this dude," tore after him and tackled him. He got him on the ground and pinned him. Bear in mind, the whole time I'm narrating to 911 and chasing around in panties and tank top. I was a bit behind my husband, in the middle of the street about 15 feet away, when a minivan squealed around the corner. It was the guy's girlfriend/getaway driver. I luckily missed it. I was super focused on reading the license plate, which was one of those cutesy font-out-of-state ones and therefore hard to read, but she yelled, "Get the frick off him or I'm running your witch over!" And then she tried to run me over. The audio and vibe I had to watch for the trial was horrifying. I'd blocked it out nearly completely and really didn't remember how close it was. She gunned the engine at me, and I threw my hands up in front of my face when I realized what she was doing, and screamed, jumping out of the way with inches to spare. The guy jumped in the van and off they went. He'd bled all over my husband, yikes, and eventually the DNA and partial plate info nailed them. They're both in prison. As an addendum, trials suck. To make it clear, don't do this. Adrenaline is one heck of a thing, and it's best not to fight burglars. We definitely both could have died. It was the third time this motherfricker had broken in and caused a huge amount of mostly uninsured damage and inventory loss, and that definitely contributed to the whole thing. He wouldn't have stopped doing it. He was a pro and was doing upwards of 3 jobs a night most nights all over the state for years. My supposed best friend decided that my wife and I were too perfect. Therefore, it must all be an act, and I was obviously treating her horribly. He was at our house after I made an awesome dinner and we were having fun drinking and singing karaoke. I went to the kitchen to put some glasses away, came back and leaned on the couch with him slightly behind to the left of me. Then I heard a thunk and felt an amazing amount of pain on the top of my head. He'd picked up the whiskey bottle from the table and smashed it into my skull. I was very confused as to what was happening. Then the blood started pouring. I didn't want to get blood everywhere, so I went to the kitchen. The guy was pacing back and forth saying weird stuff. I thought about pulling my gat, which was nearby, but then I wasn't really thinking straight. He left. The legal system let me down big time. They called him and asked what had happened, and that was all. They wouldn't even give me a restraining order. I had a huge concussion and still suffer side effects from it. My number 2 goal in life is to live longer than that crazy motherfricker so I can crap on his grave. If you're from the area I'm from, this will probably sound familiar. But I got absolutely blackout drunk at the end of the year and graduation party and ended up having to get taken home early. Later that night, another student at the party ended up shanking and killing 5 people. Turns out he had schizophrenia and thought everyone at the party was a werewolf or vampire who were threatening his life. He never went to jail but ended up being founded non-criminally responsible instead. As lucky as I feel, I don't feel lucky when I think about it. 3 of those people were people I grew up with. I mean, surely he got intervention by professionals or got treated somewhere, right? Even if it wasn't entirely his fault, you'd think that there would have to have been some serious correction in his life and a fair bit of counseling to get over the massive guilt of what he'd done as well. This is not a satisfying sort of justice for anyone, I suppose. A couple of years ago, my brother and I went to walk the dog at like 11 p.m. We left through the side gate, we live on a corner, and right as we exit I see this weird-looking guy at the corner of the footpath walking strangely towards us. Got bad vibes and told my brother to get the dog and get back inside. This guy's kind of walking side-on and hiding something in his hand behind his back. As I'm getting my brother through the gate, the guy says something like, "Oi mate, can I come in? I need a blanket, I'm freezing." I just ignored him and went inside and locked the door. We then got a call from the people who lived 2 doors up, said the same guy knocked on their door and their 10-year-old son opened it to see the guy holding a frickin' hatchet. Anyway, I'm glad I went with my gut on that one. I had a guy who was on both Crystal and A break into my apartment in college. Somehow he was convinced he lost his glasses inside. I'm doing dishes when my door gets slammed open. Next thing I know, he's behind me and I'm being throttled to death in my kitchen. As I was losing consciousness, I grabbed my roommate's acrylic pipe and frantically swung over my shoulder into his face. The pipe broke but did nothing as the guy was throttling me even harder. So I swung it again. Because the pipe broke the first time, I was hitting the guy with a 6-inch claw of acrylic glass. Afterwards, his scalp and part of his cheek were hanging off the side of his face. Essentially, I scalped him with a pipe. So I chased the guy out of my house. There was easily 2 feet of snow outside. He tried walking back to his house through a cemetery as a shortcut. Seriously, you can't make this crap up, and then passed out in the cemetery. The police only found him because I called the cops and they followed the blood and footprints through the snow. And that's the part I was most surprised by. I hit the guy in the scalp. There isn't much blood in the scalp compared to most of the body, but my kitchen was covered in blood. His blood was on my refrigerator, counter, floor, and ceiling. It was almost as traumatic to clean it. My roommates were gone for winter break. Thank God my roommate's girlfriend came over and helped me. Now, as for the guy, the cops couldn't charge him for 2 days because he needed blood transfusions. He was charged with battery, breaking and entering, and attempted murder. And he'd definitely had substances on him too. Not sure what he got convicted for, but he went to jail for 4 years. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Well, my one actually got some media. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I was representing this guy that had embezzled almost $500,000 from his business partner. He was looking down the barrel at several years in prison, a bunch of his assets had been seized by the government, and he was being sued by multiple creditors for north of $2 million, and was in the midst of an ugly divorce and wasn't allowed to see his kids. I was one of 3 lawyers he had: criminal, civil, and divorce. He was drinking a lot and using white snow. I used to get his incoherent phone calls in the middle of the night that ranged from threats to crying. He came to my office one day and asked for me, but I was in court. My secretary said he was perfectly civil. He then went to his divorce lawyer's office and shot him. Got stopped by the police a short distance away and was wounded in a shootout. He'd later tell the cops that he'd come to my office to shoot me that day and also planned to shoot his civil attorney. I was on the way home at night after meeting a friend. My home was just 10 minutes away from the train station. After a few minutes, I felt someone following me. No big deal, I thought, just someone else walking home. But I started walking faster anyway. I realized the person behind me was catching up, which was weird. Now, in my head, I was starting to make up scenarios of how to defend myself if the person would attack me. Never would I have thought this would actually happen until I feel something in the back of my head hitting me hard. I was instantly furious. I turned around and attacked the guy. My mind was just full of anger towards this stranger who I thought had hit me. We were wrestling until I fell on the ground. He was sitting on top of me, strangling me. I tried to claw my nails into his eyes as deep as I could, but then I started to black out. Suddenly, there was this thought in my head: wake up or you'll die. Well, adrenaline kicked in again and I opened my eyes and screamed at the top of my lungs, attacking him again. That helped. He stood up and began to run. I lay there for a few seconds and started to run home, still screaming. My mum was already at our door and opened for me because my screams woke her up. Or her mother's senses, who knows. She immediately called the cops and they could arrest him on the same night. It turned out that he actually shot me in the head from behind. They assumed that the weapon didn't work properly, as the bullet didn't penetrate my skull and stuck in there. But as far as I know, they never found out why the weapon misfired. I'm glad though. He told the cops that he'd already followed me a few times in the past, but had never had the guts to do it. He had wanted to kill me and then commit the unspeakable act. A customer pushed me onto a roller coaster track in the station. I work in a theme park. Luckily, the rides are covered in sensors and I tripped one, which stopped the ride. I wasn't pushed directly in front of a train. There was no intention to push me onto the track, and I didn't press charges, as there was no intention to actually kill me. We took legal action through the business. This was over a height restriction and the guy's kid was too small to ride. I was about 20 or 21 years old and walking home at about 3 a.m. after a night out, and I was absolutely plastered from drinking so much. I was about 200 meters from my house when a hooded figure jumped out from behind a bush and immediately had a knife pushing towards my stomach as he grabbed my neck and tried pulling me in. Fortunately, I was stronger and pulled away, and he went to lunge at me again when suddenly he stopped, staring for what felt like an eternity but was probably just a second or two, and then finally said, "Oh, struth, Jimmy? I haven't seen you in so long. My bad, mate," and then walked off like nothing had happened. I still don't know who he was to this day. And this is why you always treat others with kindness and respect. Never know when an old acquaintance might try and stab you for an unknown reason. My lord. I mean, the fact that this guy was out there presumably to do this to other people as well is kind of scary, but if nothing else, the fact that he just said, "Oh, sorry about that," and then just peaced out after a life-and-death struggle is kind of morbidly funny. Chilling with the bros, drinking at a park. As we drive off to leave, a car coming our way almost hits us. The driver obviously reacts like, "What the frick?" and I guess the other car noticed, because they turn around and caught up to us at a stop sign. The other driver asked if we had a problem. We told them to stop driving like idiots. Then their back window rolls down and two guys in the back draw Glocks with drum magazines. We kinda just froze up at first, but then our driver pulled off hastily. Later found out those guys got arrested for shooting someone else that same day. In my late teens, I used to buy my green herb from random dudes in the projects, the low-income housing. One day we gave some money to a guy named 40. He took it and went inside to one of the buildings. We waited in the car for several minutes. We started to think he had taken our money and just left. Right about that time, a car full of wired white dudes pulled up beside ours. Apparently my friend who was driving owed them money. They pointed a weapon at him and said that if he had enough money to buy devil's lettuce, then he could pay them back. I really thought they were going to start shooting and just drive off like it was nothing, and I hadn't even done anything wrong. I thought I was going to pee my pants. Right about that time, 40 came back with our stuff and an even bigger weapon. He scared them away and then we went back to his apartment and smoked a big old roll. What a good guy. Turns out he was only selling Mary J because he had a 6-year-old daughter, and that was the only way he knew how to give her a better life than he had. I babysat his daughter occasionally for the rest of that summer. I really hope she got a decent childhood and that her dad stayed safe and out of jail. In short, almost got shot, but was saved by a random dealer who turned out to be a nice guy. I was 16 and 2 weeks into my first job at a smoothie establishment that should be known to NBA fans. We were robbed. It was late and my co-worker's friends had been playing pranks on her all day, so when I saw someone burst through the door, I thought it was just that. Until that is, I had something metal pressed against my back and an arm wrapped around my chest. The robber gave me the whole stereotypical, "give me all the money" spiel, and ordered us to go into the back room, kneel down and face the wall. As I was kneeling and hearing him walking towards us, time seemed to slow down. Thankfully, I'd been refilling juices when he came in, so the door to the back room was partially blocked by a heavy cart. With whatever substance he was on, he wasn't coordinated enough to get past it to us, so he fled. He was followed by my coworker's husband and caught. When he was caught, they found an industrial-sized pipe wrench strapped tightly to his fist, so that he could get a stronger grip when swinging. I'm so glad that cart was there. Once a year or so, I'd look him up in the parish prison roster to see if he was still in jail. One year, he suddenly wasn't. I later found him named in a lawsuit as having shanked his cellmate a half-dozen times while the guy was asleep. Definitely doesn't seem like the nicest of guys. 9 years later, I'm still unpacking this incident in therapy. It's why I don't like walking around cities at night or sitting where I can't see the door. This all happened many years ago. I was a lead man at a factory. A girl started working there and I took an interest. After a few months, I found out she was in a substance-fueled, terrible relationship. Every night I told her to call me, I'll come get her. Finally, after months, she calls me, I come get her and take her to my house. The guy she was in the relationship with didn't take too kindly to me taking her away. He spends the next 2 years hanging around and threatening us. A few months after she and I got married, we went out for drinks. Her ex just happened to be at the bar we went to. He apologized to us for his whole threatening demeanor in the past. We were sitting outside talking with a few other people. Next thing I know, I was on my back on the ground with someone choking me. I try all I can to get them off me, but being blindsided and having them on top of me, it wasn't easy. As I struggled to get free, everything went black and then I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. In that moment, I was certain that this was the end for me. I somehow managed to get a better hold of the person's head and yank them off me. We ran to the car and got away. A week or so later, my wife had been talking to everyone she thinks might know what happened. Turns out her ex had paid 2 people $50 to do me in that night. I was doing volunteer work in Central America, working in a real bad area of the capital city. It was a slum built on top of the city's garbage dump. The whole place reeked of trash, and there were large metal cylinders coming up out of the ground throughout the area to vent the gas from decomposing garbage underground. As a fellow volunteer and I walked down a dirt path, 2 men approached us. I'd never seen them before. They were acting strangely, but I just thought they were drunk or on something. A lot of people in the area drank rubbing alcohol to get drunk since it was cheaper than beer or liquor. Over time, drinking the rubbing alcohol would really mess with their brains. As the men got closer, they began acting really friendly. Too friendly. One of them came close to me, trying to put his arm around my shoulders. At first, it seemed like the behavior of a guy who gets happy and friendly when he's drunk. However, an alarm went off in my head and I gently but firmly pushed him away. I tried to make it seem lighthearted and playful, like, "Hey man, how's it going?" affectionate shove. I didn't want to make a scene, since I was a gringo. I didn't want to seem like an ugly American. This went on over and over down the whole path. He'd get close, I'd shove him off, he'd come close again. Finally, my friend and I came to a fork in the path and we went one way while they went the other. After we got to the house of some people we knew, we told them about the 2 guys. I was so focused on protecting myself, I didn't even notice much of what was happening with the other guy. My hosts said, "Oh, everyone around here knows him. That's his routine. He comes up to people, pretends to be friendly, puts his arm around them, and then he pulls out the knife and shanks them in the stomach." I was that close to getting a knife in the gut. What is the smartest or most creative way of cheating that a student used? I remember a story from my chem professor. This student, all semester, who wasn't showing up to a class, kept getting his score improved significantly after regrades. They got their tests back and had a day to review them, and were allowed to resubmit for a regrade. They knew he was cheating because of the unlikelihood of the grading mistakes on multiple exams, but the TAs who graded it couldn't confidently say that it wasn't their handwriting. Ultimately, it was an office worker for the department who figured it out near the end of the semester. His staples were angled differently than the exams handed out that were mass stapled. He was recreating the test, printing it, re-answering it, and then grading it in the same pen as the TAs, and had done a good job copying the writing style. Not sure if this would work anymore, but if I had a paper to write on a book I didn't read, I'd find a well-written paper online, then translate the entire thing from English to German, German to French, French to Spanish, then Spanish back to English. Pull the original paper and the new one up side by side and clean up the grammar on the new paper, and you've got the same concept, just written different enough to not be plagiarism. Worked like a charm back then. My teacher shared with us a story about how since she allowed eating during her tests, one person pulled out a giant bag of M&Ms and ate a specific color corresponding to A, B, C, or D. It was a 2-student duo and they only got caught when another student ratted them out. I was supervising a final chemistry exam along with another coworker. Not 15 minutes in, a hand slams down on a desk and I turn around expecting the worst, only to see my coworker angrily shouting at a pair of really frightened 10th graders whose desk he'd smashed. Amidst the shouting, I caught the words Morse code. The guy proceeded to take them to the office. I called a hallway supervisor to take over and ran after the group. Apparently, the kids were silently tapping their fingers amongst themselves in Morse code. Not even with their fingernails, just their fingertips. I never heard a thing. My coworker happened to catch B in Morse code or something. I honestly thought he went crazy solely because of his appearance. Picture Robin Williams in Jumanji going, "What year is it?" I'm 100% sure that if this coworker weren't in the room, they'd have gotten away with it for sure. In elementary school, we had to write a paragraph each week featuring all the vocabulary words included in that unit. One clever kid wrote something along these lines. One day, Brian had to write a paragraph for English class. He sat down, picked up a pen, and used these words in it, and he proceeded to list out all the words. The teacher only let it go once because she had never seen that happen until then. In a lot of my college courses, I wasn't allowed to use anything higher than a TI-84. So I took the guts out of my TI-89 and swapped it into my TI-84. I never got caught. I'm amazed that apparently different calculators of very different capacity can use an identical chassis right down to the keyboard. Or at least that's what this answer implies. Crazy. We had one teacher, probably 2005-ish, who barely spoke English. A couple of the guys would just take an article, swap the first and last halves of each sentence and hand it in. Because he spoke the most broken English, he was Chinese, he wasn't able to distinguish it from proper English. This is before the anti-plagiarism tools we have today. I have a rare case of a teacher who hacked the system, if that's applicable. So the teacher, let's call him Mr. A, had a reputation for being a phenomenal teacher who had every student engaged and invested in his class, no matter how mundane the subject. Anytime he asked a question, every student's hand would shoot in the air, with them shouting things like, "Call on me," or "I know the answer." Simply, Mr. A developed a reputation in the district as one of its best teachers. Fast forward a couple of years and I was grabbing a coffee with Mr. A, and I asked him, "What's your trick? How did you get every student bought in?" His response was, "Well, I told the kids every time we had a visitor in class, I need you all to raise your hand like I'm giving away free candy. But if you don't know the answer, raise your left hand. If you do know it, raise your right hand. That way I know who to call on and we all look good." It worked like a charm. One of my old teachers told us a story about a student who had rigged up a tiny scroll of paper in a wristwatch with notes written on it. He turned the scroll by winding the watch. He ended up getting caught because he was winding his watch so aggressively during the exam, but the teacher loved the creativity. In high school, I was in a computer-based learning program and our science tests were taken digitally. They used a program where once you entered the test, your entire screen was locked into the test, and the only way to exit it was to click the Finish button on the test or turn off your computer, which effectively did the same thing. Another feature of the program was that once you were in the test, anything you had in your clipboard, like copied text, was not able to be pasted onto the answer sections on the test to prevent the only other way to cheat. However, after creating my own classroom at home, making fake tests and playing with the program to figure out a way to cheat, I realized it would allow you to copy things from the inside of the test and paste them elsewhere in the test. The developer of the program also didn't take into account the sign-in screen where you have to find the test and enter it. Long story short, I could copy my entire page of notes I'd taken on the test material, paste it into the section where I would enter my login information, then recopy it, enter the test and paste it again, and in one of the answer sections, use it to answer every question, then delete it before clicking Finish. I work as a web developer for a college. Stuff like this makes me paranoid about everything I do. Some smart Alex CS tried to break everything in our portal one semester just out of boredom. Best student worker I've ever had. I think the person asking the question for this video is a student crowdsourcing cheating strategies, and therefore this is one of the most creative ways of cheating that I've seen. Either that or he's a teacher. I used to use one of those rectangular erasers because the pencils the teacher gave us were cheap and the erasers only smudged the marks. The eraser came in a cardboard sleeve and I ripped it open and would write test answers on it and then erase it after the exams for reuse. My exams that used a graphic calculator, a TI-84, required us to show the examiners a proof of reset screen before the papers started. So instead of actually studying for my papers, I painstakingly redrew the proof of reset screen pixel by pixel in the TI-84's pixel art program and stored all of my notes in it. In college physics, a girl with a really intricate tattoo on her leg wrote formulas in between the tattoo lines. Even looking closely, you couldn't tell unless you knew what you were looking for. You could tell it was a test day because she wore shorts. High school kids recreated a Snapple label where the nutrition panel on the back had all of the answers, formulas, stuff like that. They only got caught because I'd never seen the flavor before and I wanted to see how much sugar was in it. Everyone knows you cheat using peach Snapple, you idiots. I can name the worst, and I've definitely shared it here before, but it wasn't my student, it was a friend's. She had downloaded a worksheet for the kids to do while she was in a meeting of some sort. The kids found the worksheet's answer sheet online and proceeded to copy the answers. The last answer said, "Student responses will vary," and that's what one kid wrote for his answer. Other times you'll see one kid misspell something or get an answer wrong, and everyone who copied from him has the same error. This happened to our entire group of chem students last year. Everyone in the classes was cheating on the homework because the answers were always online. In the second semester, someone made the mistake of writing "answers may vary," and the teacher finally realized we were all cheating. A classmate broke the screen and keyboard of his calculator and hid his cell phone in it so it wouldn't be seen from the teacher's position. The teacher approached him from behind and then caught him. I had a friend who knew Kurdish and Turkish. We all know Turkish where I'm from. Anyway, he had to move from his city due to an earthquake and come to the opposite side of the country, in Istanbul. He was writing his notes in Kurdish on his desk and one desk in front of him. Since none of us or the teachers knew Kurdish, it was like gibberish to us, but we knew he was writing down notes in Kurdish. Feels like you could have solved that pretty easily by just making him sit at a different desk for the test, but I can't fault him for using what he had to his advantage. I passed a pop quiz in high school by looking across the room and focusing on the top of the smart girl's pencil and trying to decipher if she wrote A, B, C, or D after the teacher asked each question. It actually turned out to be more successful than I thought it would. Also, I'm all about academic integrity when it comes to important higher education when relative to your field of work, but I don't understand loading immense amounts of needless information into young, hormonal teenagers and getting upset or surprised that they don't have the mental stamina to deal with it at all and would rather cheat. So, as a teacher, the smartest way I cheat is by giving the kids a note card and telling them that they can put whatever cheat stuff on it they want. It tricks them into actually studying for their math tests. This is a very common trick that many teachers use and have been using for decades. Also, a pro tip from a math teacher: most students don't know how to study for math, and this is why they struggle. Think of studying math like practicing an instrument. You need to learn a piece by practicing multiple problems from a skill set. If you aren't practicing at least 8 to 18 problems at least every day or two, then you're never going to get past the little mistakes and missteps which have probably plagued you. I witnessed probably the biggest cheating-related scandal in our high school's history. For context, we had the sweetest old guy as our chem teacher. He called everyone bud or buddy or ma'am. He always helped. He volunteered to teach driver's ed after school so kids could learn to drive. He always had a twinkle in his eye because he genuinely showed love and kindness to everyone. A side effect of this was that he was very trusting. So one day, before finals, he ran to the bathroom during class while everyone was wrapping up their lab reports. While he was gone, someone ran to his desk, found the finals just sitting there, snapped a pic and then ran back to their desk before he got back. Somehow, nobody tattled, probably because 90% of our grade level in that class was on board with it. The pictures got texted around, but a few people were smart enough to Bluetooth into each other so that it couldn't be tracked. Well, after the test, everyone had high scores and apparently someone confessed. This resulted in a huge investigation by the assistant principals, school police officer, and faculty. They traced every text message and busted so many people, except for the ones who'd transferred via Bluetooth. They had to reissue that test. It was crazy. I felt really bad for the teacher. He was really sad someone had taken advantage of him, and I was too. He was such a good dude. And to clarify, the school didn't need to trace the messages. They just had 1v1 interviews with the school cop nearby, so kids would feel pressured to snitch. Apparently a few cracked under the pressure, but if I recall correctly, a fair number got away with it. Also, the cop was our school cop. Real badge, weapon, car. He was just there to protect us against any number of the things that threaten you as a high school student in America. He patrolled for loiterers as well, ran substance searches, ran security for after-school events and pep rallies, so no actual police force was present, just this guy. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I was grading a written assignment that had a 1,000 word count minimum, and one particular paper just felt really short to me despite Word telling me it was roughly 1,100 words long. On a hunch, I hit Ctrl-A, and sure enough, after the paper concluded, there was a lot of white nonsense text on a white background. I used a text file on one of the original iPods. The teacher was fine with listening to music during tests. It made my life so much easier. I'm not a teacher, but one of my friends in high school wrote all the physics equations we needed to know in a really tiny font on Jolly Rancher wrappers. I had summaries of chemistry and a load of math formulas on my graphic calculator, a TI-83, and I had a backup on a thumb drive so that I could put it back after a mandatory reset. My girlfriend works for a dental exam company, which is obviously super high-stakes exams. Since the exams are worldwide, they actually have found people from one time zone paying people from another time zone to email questions to them right before the exam starts. Stretch a rubber band around a textbook, write whatever you want on it, then when you take it off the textbook, it'll just look like a scribble until you stretch it to see what's written. Spanish conjunctions drove me to do some incredibly unethical things. How would you use that without looking suspicious? You could say it's a fidget thing, but it's risky. You've got to establish a precedent before the exam. Have a rubber band in class every day. I had a class in the morning with a kid who was a TA for my physics class the afternoon before. It was a weird period system at my old school. He'd tell me the answers to app tests he'd graded the day before, and I'd write them in black ink on the side of my sole on my black boots. I'd then sit with my leg bent with my foot on my knee and read the answers during the test. You couldn't see them unless the light hit the ink just right. After the test, I'd just lick my finger and smudge the answers out. A classmate was printing the answers on his paper in very pale grey so that it barely could be seen. Still got caught because the teacher noticed him reading an empty sheet. Physics professor posted the answers to the homework online after it was due. The thing was, he was just making the existing pages visible and the URLs followed a simple and predictable format. If you knew the URL, you could look at it before it was made public. I'm a high school teacher, but this was about my own high school math teacher playing us and cheating. It was an honors algebra and geometry class, and it was well known that Mr. D reused the same questions every year and just changed the numbers. He made a big deal about making sure we all gave our exam papers back to him after we'd looked at our scores and gone over everything together to prevent cheating for the next year. Well, of course, some of my classmates got their hands on a complete set of tests from the previous year. Soon, everyone had a set. Before each exam, we'd sit together and make sure we knew how to solve every problem on that test so we could do it on the real exam with different numbers. Years later, when I became a teacher myself, I saw Mr. D at a funeral. I confessed to him that this is what we used to do. He smirked and said, "Who do you think leaked the test packet to get you to study?" Mr. D had figured out that kids won't study if the teacher suggests it, but if they think they're getting away with something, they totally will. So he managed to get a test packet out and circulating as contraband. Blew my mind. Writing down math formulas and putting them in the instructions insert of the calculator. Most recently, kids will put the answers on their smartwatches. It's to the point where I make all students remove their watches and place them on the classroom counter before the test starts. Yep, kids putting answers in their smartwatches does seem like the next logical step in the grand history of cheating, but speaking even in 2025 when they've been out for a while, the narrator is a little mind-blown that apparently so many kids have this very expensive accessory. Or is this just me channeling my Principal Skinner and being completely out of touch with the kids of today? How many of you have smartwatches? I don't even have a smartwatch. During a spelling test, "Miss, how do you spell piano?" The spelling word was piano. The teacher went on autopilot and started spelling the word for the class. My sister-in-law is a teaching assistant at her kid's school. Her youngest daughter, my niece, was 7 at the time. She stole the test the night before, pretended it was homework and had her mum help her with her homework, then snuck the answers into the test. One of the other kids caught her, let the teacher know, and my sister-in-law, who was overseeing test conditions, died inside when she realized it was the homework sheet that she had filled out. As a student, I remember when my entire year level was accused of cheating, as the test results came back consistently high. What the teachers failed to realize was that some of the answers were actually hidden in the other questions. So if you got stuck on one question, you could actually find the answer later on in another one. An example would be, This is a Japanese language test. What does this word mean? And then later on, a question would use that word in context, so you'd understand what it meant. I remember in middle school, we'd rely on the one kid who actually studied. Most of the quizzes our teachers gave us were multiple choice, so if the answer was A, the kid would cough, if the answer was B, he'd sniffle, and if the answer was C, he'd sigh, and if the answer was D, he'd stretch in his seat. Everyone in my science class was eventually that kid. Every time there was a quiz, a different person in the class would study. I used my programmable calculator to write a program for every possible math or physics question that gave me every step of the problem-solving sequence along the way. They always said, "Show your work." When I was in high school, I bought a pen with a window in it. There was a logo and text on the inside of this window, and each time you clicked the pen, the message inside would flick over to something else. I took it apart and was able to tape paper over this spinning tube and fit things that I would need to help me on some quizzes and tests. I used to lightly write the answers on a desk before the test with pencil. If someone calls you out on it before the test, then you claim it's from writing down notes during class and you didn't notice it was marking the desk. After using the necessary material, you just robbed the pencil marks off the desk, thus destroying the evidence. Printing a fake water bottle label with test information on it. Back in the mid-2000s, schools here in Australia started to have strict guidelines on what could be bought into exams. Water was allowed, but must be kept in a non-labeled bottle. If you bought water, you had to rip off the label. As a student, we used to wear uniforms and leather shoes. As mine's a beta pair, I usually write on them with black ink pens. When the tests came, I angled it just enough to be seen by sunlight. Also, the edges of our uniform button-down shirts were filled with formulas. I heard a story from my friend of a teacher who caught two kids cheating through Morse code by blinking. During an advanced placement US history test in high school, we had a question asking about the author of a book. A kid raised his hand and says, "Miss Krabappel, I read the name of the book this weekend and I really liked it." The teacher, obviously forgetting that she had put this question on the test, replies with, "Oh, by author's name? I love that book." The whole class burst out laughing, but nobody said anything because she had just given us the answer to the test question. Here are the methods that I used back in the day. I wrote formulas on those pens that had roll-out calendars. I almost got caught when I accidentally lost my grip and the calendar rolled back in the pen in such a loud way that my classmates looked at me. I also wrote formulas on my clothes and body, the hem of my shirt, and the part of my legs that gets covered by a sock. I put a couple of chapters on the Notebook app in my old BlackBerry. I did this by hand, which involved me copying straight from the book to my phone. I put answers in the song lyrics on my iPod, but I didn't do this frequently. I forget why. It was either because my school cracked down on technology, like phones, iPods, or laptops, or that I just had a hard time scrolling with ClickWheel. We'd straight up swap papers. I think I only did it during trigonometry, because during exams we were arranged alphabetically, and I was seated next to this dude who was really good at math. I was afraid of doing this, but the fact that we were so close to each other made it less scary, so I did it. The only time I got caught was when this new teacher noticed that I kept taking out my handkerchief, which had a 1x1 piece of paper that had some formulas. In hindsight, if I'd pulled a bit of sleight of hand, I would have never been caught. The funny thing is, the year before, I cheated on a test with 2 letter-sized papers. I've not tried this method yet, and I don't think anyone here did, but there's a certain level of hertz in sound that only people below a certain age can hear. There are devices that play that kind of sound, so if the teacher is old, he or she won't hear the sound. Using that, the students can communicate with Morse code and such. I thought about this, and it's not very practical or useful, but it's very creative, so I thought about sharing my idea. One time, my class straight up asked the teacher for the answer to the first multiple choice, and she jokingly said, "Oh, I don't know, C." And then come test time, we informed her that she actually gave us the right answer. Music students using music sheets as answer sheets for other students. The notes equal the same as the answers for the Scranton tests. One guy photocopied an article out of National Geographic, complete with the magazine headings and page numbers, and turned it in as his own work. Oh no, wait, that was the dumbest. What are your night shift horror stories? I hate recalling this story. I work night shift at a rehab facility. We have a protected gate with a camera looking down from above and one of those doorbell cameras. In the office, the camera monitor is on one wall and the doorbell monitor is on another. I was doing some paperwork and I saw this guy walk past, stop for a few seconds, then slowly turned around, walk back and stared up at the camera. and he kept staring. The facility is in a rough neighborhood, so I'm fairly used to folks hanging around the gate and I usually ignore it. But the way he was staring was off-putting. Like his eyes and expression were hollow and dead, almost as if he were in deep thought about something horrible. I was pretty sure he was zonked on synthetics. I used the intercom to see if he was okay, but he just kept staring directly at the camera. We have a rule. If it's not hurt or trying to come through the fence, just let it be. No sense in engaging needlessly with someone potentially hostile or messing with the locals. Let me tell y'all, he just stood there and stared at that camera for 2 hours. The same dead-eyed expression staring right into my soul. I did a round and then came back to find him gone, which to be honest only creeped me out more. I worked at a liquor store for a few years. One of the homeless guys, probably late 50s, that stood outside would ask for money, and 9 times out of 10, if they said no, he'd flash them his old wrinkly, crusty package. I had to chase him off every night so people didn't have to suffer that sight. Annoyingly, people who saw me chasing him off or threatening to call the cops often gave me dirty looks, as if I hated homeless people or treated them like trash all the time. In actuality, I was saving them from that which you cannot unsee. As a teen, I used to close down the combo gas station and truck stop that I worked at alone. My boss used to pop up out of the shadows as I was closing down the till with the backup lights on. He'd be super calm and act like it wasn't creepy at 11 p.m. when he should be at home with his family. He was even at my high school graduation. He and his wife's numbers are still in my phone. Anyway, he's currently on trial for murdering a working girl back in '94. Cold case potentially solved via DNA and modern science. Ugh. I worked a parking garage at the airport. I was cleaning the top deck and then I noticed about 100 ravens all over a truck with a tarp over the bed. I took my flashlight, expecting something awful. I noticed as I got closer the smell and the ravens taking turns going to a hole they'd torn open and then popping back out covered in gunk. Some guy had left a broke-down beater car with a couple of animal carcasses in the back to rot. No heads. I checked the logs and the damn truck had been there since November and it was April. So everything was just thawing and breaking down. I called my boss, who calls maintenance, to get a crew out there. They had the airport police come over and do an investigation to make sure there were no human remains. Some trophy hunter flew in, bought a cheap truck, caught what he wanted and left the rest for us to deal with. Didn't even bother to register or update the vehicle title, so the guy who sold it got a knock on the door from the cops. So after 5 months in a car, that was a tasty slurry you had in the back there. I imagine you couldn't tell where one animal ended and the other began. I imagine that would be the last day at work for a few people if they found that. Ugh. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks' home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some butthole kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as the Grim Reaper, knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. I used to work nights at a Home Depot. There was one time where for a week or so our store stayed open 24 hours. For the most part, this wasn't really a problem. Typically, nobody comes shopping for home improvement items at 2 in the morning, except for that one couple that came looking for marble countertops at 1:30 in the morning and the woman was wearing a really nice dress. Anyway, I guess there was also this one time a young lady came looking for a toilet paper roll holder a little after midnight. I'd just gotten off my first break. She was wearing jorts and one of those white with black belt stereotypical karate outfits, a gi. She was oddly specific about which roll holder to get as well. But the real story lies within the insulation. It was nearing 3 in the morning, and me and another guy were stocking insulation, as well as fixing the bays and some such maintenance. A bunch of big R30s had fallen in their bay, and while I was sorting through them, a fricking hand came out of the mess and grabbed my arm. I lost my mind enough for not only the guy I was working with to freak out, but also for my boss, who was across the store, to come and check out the commotion. Turns out a homeless drunkard had come into the store at some point, and I can only assume before the night crew showed up, he had made a nest in the insulation where he fell asleep. The guy was in bad shape too, like so far gone into whatever inebriation that we had to call the police to remove him. I was always a little more cautious around insulation after that, at least for the time the store stayed open 24 hours. Working late at an ice rink, I'm a Zamboni driver. It's a local rink with 2 sheets of ice. I get a phone call from my coworker. He's calling me on the Zamboni. It's loud, but I can clearly hear him yelling, "There's blood, a lot of blood, oh God!" And he hangs up. So I start running. I tear into his arena, and the ice is indeed covered in blood. Like seriously, so much. Then I realized how stupid we were. Well, more him than me. When he started resurfacing the ice, a hydraulic line to his board brush blew and started spewing out red hydraulic fluid. It looked like crimson blood on the ice. I ran onto the ice and told him to pull off. He was frazzled and driving in circles. Since he lost hydraulic pressure, he couldn't pull his conditioner up when trying to get off the ice. Ruined the blade on the Zamboni, but there wasn't much else he could do. Couldn't leave it on the ice. I told him it was hydraulic fluid, not blood. But he should check for dead bodies around the rink anyway. The best part was, after he got off the ice with fear in his eyes and adrenaline pumping, he said, "Hey, can you call our boss and tell him?" "No, it's 2 a.m. It broke on you, so you have to call him. That's how it works." I watched the light die a little in his eyes. Many years ago, I worked at a regional radio station in the middle of fricking nowhere, Australia. I was the overnight operator. Keep the overnight playlist running, set up for the morning, do all the manual checks for the next day, and jump on the desk if anything funky happens. I spent a lot of time sitting in what was essentially a tin shed in the middle of a paddock, with my dog, shoes off, listening to 50s and 60s music and doing crossword puzzles. Except one night when the roo shooters came through. They spooked the kangaroos in the paddock, and one of them jumped headfirst through our office window. So there's me, barefoot and half asleep, when this 6-foot kangaroo smashes through the glass window. Blood and glass everywhere. My dog starts chasing the kangaroo, I'm chasing my dog, and the kangaroo bounds around the office, knocking stuff off the desks in the dark, bleeding everywhere. I run and open the studio bay doors, and my dog chased it outside, where I'm assuming the poor kangaroo was shot. And then I had to call my boss. I was an orderly in a hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office, looking at us a little shiftily, then came back again and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said, yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home. But that seemed strange given that it had just gone midnight. Nope, he wanted us to let him in and leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently, he had tried it in the past, as security recognized him instantly. I was running the register at a 24-hour supermarket. Stock person comes running into produce, carrying a mop handle, screaming, "You motherfricker!" Out of sight, he kept yelling, "Motherfricker!" and smacking something with the mop for like 5 minutes. I was ringing up customers and freaking out because he was losing his mind, but I wasn't interested in getting involved in a murder, so I just ignored it. Later, I found out he was chasing a rat. Warning, medical gross stuff incoming. I worked in an emergency room. The worst night that comes to mind involves a patient that was bitten by a baby timber rattlesnake. He was bleeding out of every single orifice by the time he got to us. More blood than I'd ever seen before outside of the one guy who went 75 miles per hour on his motorbike into asphalt. I don't remember how many doses of crowfab we gave him, but it was the hospital's entire supply. But trying to get him stabilized, arranging the helicopter transport to a bigger and better equipped facility, all of the blood, those weren't even the worst parts. The worst part was when the patient lost control of his bowels. I will never, ever forget that smell. I spent the entire time standing by the door with a battery-powered fan and a handful of gauze pads saturated with cinnamon oil trying to reduce some of the smell. The doctor occasionally stuck her head out just so I could waft the cinnamon oil in her face. Yes, by some miracle the patient did end up surviving, and as far as I know he made a full recovery. But the blood, the smell, and just the shock of it all, yeah, never underestimate a baby timber rattlesnake. Okay, so up until now, the narrator was under the impression that if you were bitten by a rattlesnake, the poison would just sort of kill you internally, and that was that. Now after this story and a Google search, I've been faced by the unpleasant reality that if we're bit by one, we do in fact bleed from every part of the body that can bleed until we crap ourselves to death. Lovely. Many years ago, I'd briefly had a job that started at 3:30 a.m. The job itself was very boring, but the commute was wild. The world was at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been completely called in yet, so one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded, deep enough that I had no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning, because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade, with squad cars everywhere, absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers, but all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. It was just a creepy, unsettling experience. I did hospital security for about 2 months. It was a small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who had passed from their rooms and transferred into the morgue freezer. We'd just brought a decedent to the morgue, and right before we were able to transfer them to the freezer, their cell phone rang. Granted, pretty tame compared to some stories, but at the time it gave us a decent fright. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I worked in a residential treatment center. One person with some severe trauma, like the unspeakable act, came sleepwalking into the room screaming to please untie her while clawing at her wrists. She was begging me to help her because, quote, he's torturing me. I sat her down and pulled her bracelets and watch off. She went completely limp, then got up and went back to bed. It freaked me out seeing the raw emotion of her trauma, since she was always smiling and relatively calm during the day. Another time I was doing my nightly checks, and a guy suddenly walked out from behind the door, coming straight at me. I screamed and threw my flashlight at him. It was a smiley face balloon. That second scenario just sounds like the fake out in a horror movie before you turn around and the actual murderer is standing right there. Leaving one night from work, I was followed by a log truck, and it kept going faster and faster until I was at 100 miles per hour. I pulled off as the truck blew past my car, rocking it. Thing was, there was twisty turns ahead. And then I couldn't find the truck. Nope, he wasn't experiencing brake failure. This was on an uphill, on which the route was slow and progressively uphill. I'm not on the Grapevine or 4th of July pass. I was just hauling butt. They were running bobtail. Usually, if a truck loses brakes, the driver would probably engage the engine brakes and downshift. Work in the winter for me is plowing and snow removal. It was late and I'd been out for over 24 hours at this point. I pulled into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over 100 yards away so that I could let the truck stay on so I could stay warm. 6-wheel Mack things are loud. As I was nodding off, there was a very loud bang and it felt like someone then pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily, I always lock my truck doors. I immediately threw on every strobe, rear, headlight, and started looking around and I saw absolutely nothing. It scared the crap out of me. Needless to say, I never sleep anywhere other than a lit parking lot now. This was more of a very weird event. Sometimes I work night shifts. One time I was going home around 4 a.m. or so. It was pitch dark outside and very quiet. A person on a bike came out of nowhere and said he remembered me from middle school. He even said the right school name. And then just rode off. Used to work night shift at a 24-hour Walmart. Customers are nuts enough in the daytime, but they become weird after midnight. Once I had an elderly guy come in wearing only a jean jacket and fishnet stockings. He came up to my register, leaned in, and asked if we carried anything to get rid of lice. These plastic barriers that all stores have during COVID to protect cashiers, they need to keep those even after the pandemic ends. I lost count of the amount of times customers got into my personal space to ask about products for fleas, lice, or rashes. Ugh. One of the managers came through the drive-thru at 4 in the morning, drunk and ordered an absurd amount of food, and then blew chunks out the window of whoever's car it was onto the drive-thru. Turns out she was the manager that was starting at 7 and said not to worry about the vomit and that she'd clean it up when she started. The amazing thing is that she arrived on time and cleaned it up. Not a horror story for me, but sure as heck one for her. I was once staying late doing some scenic painting in a college campus theater. It was late, pitch black outside, and very quiet in the building. A few of us were up on the stage, not really talking, just taking care of business, when suddenly I saw out of the corner of my eye something go very quickly by the open door to the lobby. What the frick? Then it went by again, and I actually saw what it was. A guy with long hair, wearing pajamas and no socks or shoes. He was tiptoeing in a very exaggerated way, pulling his knees up very high and grinning. What the frick? It sounds kind of funny, but it was creepy as heck. We made eye contact, and one of the other painters was just about to go shut the door when the dude walked right in. He stood there, staring at us for a full minute. You could have heard a pin drop. He threw his arms out to the sides dramatically and said, "I am your savior, Jesus Christ!" No one responded, and he eventually walked out. I guess he was hoping to get more of a reaction. The door was promptly shut and locked behind him, and security was called. They weren't impressed. Turns out he was a patient at some sort of group home nearby and had done this multiple times. I still get creeped out to this day if I'm working in a theater at night. Okay, my money was on college prank, but that's far more concerning. At least he doesn't seem to have been dangerous, right? Is that the most literal messiah complex we've ever heard of? although I'd guess that people actually believing they're Jesus is probably its own condition. I was walking through the simulation lab for nursing students at the hospital I work at on very little sleep. All the lights were off and it was my first time working night shift. I turned a corner and saw what I thought was a person standing behind a lamp that was on. Turns out it was a mannequin holding the pull cord. It really freaked me out and I was awake after that. I was closing supervisor at a grocery store and someone managed to take a dump between the bathroom and the exit doors at 8:59. We close at 9. You'd think, oh, there's literal poopy on the floor, surely people will walk around it. No. Instead, they continue to plow through it, so there's now crap on multiple grocery carts, the exit is scattered with feces, there's doo-doo on people's shoes undoubtedly, and there's scat in the parking lot. Luckily for me, my less squeamish supervisor working with me that closing night volunteered to mop up the exit and bathroom, which to our surprise, had also been made brown on. For the record, human excrement makes me immediately gag and throw up whenever I get a whiff of it, so I ended up blowing chunks in the trash next to the crapper exit. I worked at a distress center almost 10 years ago. Was on the 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift. I got about 2 phone calls each hour of the shift from the same guy saying that he was tied up in a room, his privates were tied up with leather straps, and his wife was getting railed by 5 other guys in another room. I asked him each time if he was in distress, and he said, no. Every time. I kept telling him that if he's not in distress, then he shouldn't be calling, and then I let him go. I just can't believe he was up at 12 through 6 to make those calls. It was 3 a.m. Popular Canadian coffee shop. There was one old baker in the back that rarely interacted with me past a dirty joke or dirtier ditty from his Navy days. Other than that, I'm completely alone. Not another soul around the area, and I expected it to remain so for at least an hour yet. I was boxing up the day-old food for the homeless shelter when I swear I see something out of the corner of my eye. It's behind me. I turn and then look down. There's a small child standing there. A native little toddler with a faux hawk staring at me intensely. I'm struck dumb with how absurd the situation is. How did he get behind the counter? I didn't hear the door open or see him come through the counter. I scanned the storefront. No one. I yell for the baker in case he has a friend or something visiting their lost kid. He comes over and, like me, does a double take at the kid and is baffled. The kid starts muttering incoherently. I get him a glass of water and a donut hole, and the baker runs out of the store to do a perimeter check of the block. I call the non-emergency line and explain that I have a little kid with no parents. I can't get any information from the boy, who just mumbles, and I can't make out what he's saying. The police arrive, the baker comes back and says he can't find anyone else in the streets. The guy from the 24/7 store said he'll keep an eye out. The police try to chat to the kid and also get nothing but mutterings and half-hearted gestures, and they take him away. I see them again for their morning coffee, and they told me the little guy walked several kilometers from the nearest reservation in the dead of night to my store. He'd got into his parents' medicine cabinet and then just walked out of the house. I was floored. It must have taken that poor baby hours to get to me. Seeing him behind me like that in the dead of night still shakes me to this day. It spooked me more than the guy that threw a pot of coffee at me, or the woman that tried to shank me with a plastic spoon because I refused to give her a metal one, and the guy that waited around 4 hours hoping to catch me alone so he could teach me a lesson since I didn't have the flavor of bagel he wanted. Ugh. People are the worst, by the way. I worked night shift at a large grocery store, one that wasn't open overnight but had a skeleton crew to work the loads and do prep and clean. I worked near the entrance, large glass doors but visually blocked off from my vantage point. Around 3 a.m. I hear knocking on the doors. This isn't completely uncalled for. Usually it's someone coming in for an early shift but didn't have a keycard. Sometimes it's food delivery or sometimes a customer who thinks we're open despite clearly being closed. I approach the door. It's a man that I don't recognize, wet from the rain. He looks normal enough, but something about him unnerved me. He had that vibe to him. You know, the one where it seems like they're on their way to becoming a full-blown crystal addict. But for now, they still managed to give the appearance of functionality. He was holding his crap together just enough to appear normal, but the edges were definitely shaky. Anyway, without unlocking the door, I announced the store was closed. He told me that he just needed my help. His car had broken down in the parking lot and he needed a boost. I didn't drive, so I told him I couldn't help him. I should have walked away there, but he was out in the rain and I did legitimately feel bad, so I told him I'd see if anyone of our few remaining crew did drive. I found someone who was willing to help and got the night crew manager involved as well. We went out. It turns out he was parked a bit off the entrance in a fairly secluded spot, and he had a lady with him. There was a similar vibe with her. Almost, but not exactly normal. It didn't click right away, but I figured they'd been hooking up in the car in the parking lot and maybe left the radio or lights on and drained the battery. To me, that explained the weird, unnerving feeling. They either felt ashamed or guilty, and it was showing through. Anyway, my coworker goes over to help give them a boost. The manager and I stay out there with him, nearby, watching. The two lovebirds kept peeking over at us uncomfortably. After a few moments, the coworker returns from the car and hurries us back inside. We don't see them drive off, which seems odd. We get inside, lock up again, and then the coworker thanks us for staying out there with him and not leaving him alone with them. He also caught on to the unnerving air about them, and it made him worried. What worried him more was when it also turned out that there was nothing wrong with the car. What's the most absurd thing that happened in an escape room? A kid I knew from school, his family owns an escape room business. The ongoing issues is just people trying to take things when they're clearly nailed down or nailed to the wall. He did mention, though, that a little kid peed in one of the prop bottles. I attended a Saw series-themed escape room with my significant other and some randos, since the room required 4 to 6 people. We got locked in to start, chained to fixtures like the darkroom scene from the movie. The lights are off. As soon as the thing starts up, one of the randos says, "I have a piece in case we need to shoot someone." I thought he was joking. We all did. Eventually, the lights turn on and he pulls out a real gat and sits it in the sink and says, "I'm leaving this in the sink in case something happens to me. This is for everyone." I did an escape room with a group of friends. At the end, you found a flash drive which was supposed to be plugged into a computer. We opened the document and there was instructions to print out. We started to print and then the printer gave us an out of ink error. We assumed this was part of the game and started looking for a magenta cartridge. Then an employee slipped into the room, replaced the cartridge, and told us to hit print again. Apparently it wasn't part of the game, they just ran out of ink. One time our players were doing the bank heist theme, done in the dark and you have headlamps, and about 4 puzzles in, one of my employees realized that they'd had an item in their pockets still. So we brain blasted for a couple of minutes and decided the best course of action was to pretend the employee was a security guard and walk around the bank. So we went over the room intercom and warned them to hide because it looked like a security guard was coming into them. Seeing all of the players hide in complete fear was priceless. One guy wasn't even hiding, he was just sprawled up against the wall. Our, quote, security guard walked around, said, everything seems good, and placed the item down on the desk. It was legendary that they didn't suspect anything. I had a group of drunk guys go in and they ran through their allotted hints pretty quickly. They asked for another hint and we said over the speakers that they were out of hints. One of the guys started threatening to take his clothes off until we gave him another hint. We didn't even have to give him the extra hint though. His friends chilled him out and ended up finding the next clue pretty shortly after that. I did an escape room with my family and now the workers are obliged to tell you not to lick the light bulb. This is because some guy thought if he licked the light bulb, the answer would be revealed on it. The only answer he found was that light bulbs are hot and can burn your tongue. It's always funny to think that every completely unnecessary rule had an absolute moron who's the reason it was put in place. The same is true with HR policies. Don't be the reason HR is a policy on anything, folks, unless you want everyone in the office to remember you for the rest of time. I went to one where there were 3 identical rooms where teams competed at the same time. If you finished, then you got to watch and listen to the other teams. Our team did pretty well and we got to watch the other 2 teams try to complete it. Anyway, there was this one lock which is a number combination and you solve it by finding some sheet music in a book with 5 notes on it, which corresponded to numbers. The piece was entitled The Key or something similar, so you knew you needed it for a something. Anyway, this other team, instead of converting to numbers and putting in the combination, chanted this 5-note tune at the lock. When it didn't work, they tried it again, and then someone else tried. This went on for 10 minutes and got louder and louder. Eventually, the game master stepped in and told them it was not going to work. Apparently, they were the only team ever to do that. My buddy guessed a locks combo, which gave us the final clue, but we hadn't found the other ones. We ended up solving the room backwards. When the room administrator came in, she had nothing else to say but, "What the frick did you guys do?" The first thing I had to learn working at an escape room was that everything, yes everything in the room was going to be dismantled, pulled on, or messed with in some way. You've got a screwdriver in the room? Maybe there's a clue in the light switch cover. Black light? Must have to take it completely apart. TV for clues? Must have to unplug and change the inputs. And anything not nailed down is bound to be broken. My friend worked in an escape room and he told me that some guys tried to smash a hole in the wall to get out because it was an Alcatraz-themed room. Me and my husband love escape rooms and wanted to share our love of them with our family. When we got out of the escape room, the super amazing nuclear explosion room in Chattanooga, Tennessee, the room operator was cracking up laughing. I guess at one point, in order to get the keys or clues, my over-enthusiastic husband had picked up my 8-year-old nephew by the ankles upside down and was shoving him in barrels. I had no idea he was doing this, but the operator was dying. My husband's family isn't much better. We did an underwater submarine one where you have to escape before you drown in Atlanta. My mother-in-law was hyperventilating in the fake escape room pod with her seatbelt on. As players, we walked into the pirate-themed escape room and there was treasure on the floor, a cannon, a parrot, scattered maps, and a piano. My friend was like, "Oh cool, I can play some backing music." Proceeds to play Pirates of the Caribbean theme and clunk. The door unlocks and the game is over. The whole point was to solve puzzles to collect pieces to the music sheet of the theme. Best 30 seconds and 20 euros ever spent. Oh god, my time has come. People do dumb stuff in escape rooms constantly, but that's the whole point and it's usually in good fun. The best part of my old escape room job was that it was literally right next door to a brothel. People would frequently come to our door not realizing that they were one door over from where they wanted to be, and they'd ask, "Hey, how much?" I said in my customer service voice, "Well, it depends how many people you bring. It's $40 each if you're a group of 2, then it goes down to $32 each if you're a group of 8. Usually we recommend groups of 4 to 6 people. That seems to be the sweet spot. Their looks of horror will make me laugh forever." I work at an escape room and too many customers come into play and put the torches in their mouth. Disgusting. We had a couple get in the room and start to get frisky instead of playing the game. Had one who was super drunk and just started to pee in the corner of the room. Another lady who had been drinking decided to stay in the room and throw up everywhere, and then put props to cover up the mess instead of leaving the room to go to the toilet, and many others. One time, a group was trying to figure out the code to a locked compartment. So this huge guy in the group decided this was a waste of time and tried to rip off the component door with his bare hands. He was almost successful, but we stopped him before he could do further damage to the door. He didn't understand what he'd done wrong. Another one happened where a group were handcuffed and they couldn't find the key. The game master was trying to give them clues to find the key, but they still couldn't find it. So, one group member thought it would be the best to use his leg. There was a table in the room with some items on it. He proceeded to knock over all the items with the one kick. That group didn't win. In the Netherlands, there's a prison escape room where everyone is a prisoner and you have to escape prison. It's done in an actual ancient prison. There were about 300 participants and 85 actors, mostly prison guards and some prisoners. They have over 15 storylines which you can follow, and there are other inmates, actors, who'll lead these storylines and send you on quests. Coming back to the question though, at the beginning they warned everyone that no physical contact was allowed because during the first time, people would actually threaten each other to get money and guards had been attacked. Also, they had to warn people that you weren't supposed to try climbing the 50-foot-high prison wall. I had a group come in. I noticed they'd been drinking a little but seemed mostly fine, so I let them into the room and started the clock. They were just wandering around. At the half-an-hour mark, they were laying on the floor and rolling around. They didn't do any harm to the room. I don't remember if they even solved one puzzle. When I let them out after an hour, they claimed they'd had fun, but they didn't really do anything. And did they remember it the next day? I don't know. Something tells the narrator that there was more than just alcohol going on here. Seems kind of risky to do anything harder than booze or more illegal in an escape room, but hey, if that's what floats your boat and you don't seem to actually be annoying the attendants, by all means, trip away. You're probably better than those other people who just trash the rooms. I don't work at one, but my co-worker went to one last year, and his story was hilarious. He's a really serious guy from Boston. He got talked into going to one with his wife and a few old friends that had come down for a vacation. He said as soon as they walked in, he saw a broom that looked completely out of place, so he grabbed it. He thought they'd need it at some point. They made it out of the first room. They got to the second room, and he's still got the broom. He swears it was just too out of place to not be a part of the puzzle at some point, and they make it through the second room. The third room, they get stuck. They're reading clues over and over, and he gets fixated on the broom while everyone else is searching the room. He was looking it over, up and down, checking the handle for markings. Mind you, he has terrible nearsighted vision, and checking the bristles. Time was running out, and he was arguing with his wife at this point that the broom was the final clue. time runs up, they walk out and the crew is just dying laughing. Someone left the broom by mistake. Nothing more, nothing less. He carried the damn broom through 3 rooms. He got a good laugh about it later, but he was embarrassed at the time. It was a great story he told the next morning at work. Oh God, so many stories. I worked for various escape rooms for a few years. You'd be amazed at the amount of players who want to bring their own tools into the game. Screwdrivers, lockpicks, stuff like that. You have to nail down everything too, or players will absolutely destroy it. The drunker they are when they start, the worse the damage is. We once had a player literally try to tear off the drywall because they thought there had to be something behind it. In one of our rooms, we had this big heavy-duty picture frame screwed into a wall with 4-inch nails, and they still managed to pry it off. We've had doors taken off hinges, kids trying to crawl inside the vents, the list goes on. I don't know if it counts as absurd, but one of the most unique experiences I've had, there was a wedding proposal. The guy worked it out with us ahead of time. We put the ring and a note he wrote professing his love behind some bars in the last puzzle you unlock before getting out of the room. His girlfriend actually ended up fitting her hands between the bars and got the note way early, but the guy was still running around trying to solve stuff because he didn't notice she had it, and she was sitting there reading it, starting to bawl. She said yes, by the way. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. At an escape room near me, they had a group of lads on a stag do. These guys got very drunk, and during the escape room they thought they could escape via the sewers. They managed to rip out the manhole cover, which was bolted down into the concrete. This cover is now permanently broken as it's too expensive to fix, they said, advised us not to escape via the sewers. I interviewed for a job at an escape room. They told me that one of their standard instructions you must tell every group is to not stick things in electrical outlets because too many people did it. What's messed up is that I went to an escape room in LA where one of the puzzles was to literally stick a fork in a socket. Everyone told me I was insane when I suggested it, but 2 of the prongs were folded back and there was fake soot around the fake outlet. I did it and the boom gave us the next clue. I thought it was super stupid though. Why risk people learning that behavior and trying it elsewhere? I've heard of multiple escape rooms where one of the solutions is to do something like this that would be really dangerous under normal conditions. I can't even begin to fathom the stupidity involved in teaching your customers to potentially unalive themselves in order to win the game. One guy peed on the wall thinking that the plaster was snow. A group came in that disassembled some of the furniture, a bed and a desk, then ripped some wallpaper off the walls and pulled the heads off some of the stuffed animals. We had a room called the prison break. The players were starting in a cell, and to make it realistic, there was a toilet in there. Gladly, people didn't try to take a whiz or number 2 in it, but they also refused to touch it, although we were given a hint that there was a hidden key by the toilet. Later in the game, they had to search for a specific case file for a murderer, but they just searched for their own file as if we'd put a file for every new player in there. A lot of people lost their game on that spot as it was the last quest to do. I've done a lot of escape rooms and chatted with all the staff. These are the dumbest people I've been told about. The first is one of the rooms that's based on Jumanji and has a waterfall with real water in it. Enough people have tried to drink the water that they had to tell people not to in their opening spiel. Another one has a bunch of museum-style display cases with glass covering the top with different puzzles inside. One of them has sand in it and small holes in the top. Someone tried to tip the display case over and get the sand out so they could read the hidden message. When the game master told them to stop doing that, she stopped momentarily and then tried again 2 minutes later. The game master told her if she did it again, she'd be kicked out, and the woman said, "Just making sure you're paying attention." And people constantly try to pull up floorboards or tear down wallpaper in the horror-themed rooms, even after they've been told there's nothing hidden there and warned not to do it or they'll get charged for the damage. I feel kinda bad about the time our group unscrewed half the pictures on the wall using a paperclip, since none of us had the sense to think that maybe the pictures being screwed down was a sign we weren't supposed to look behind them. To elaborate, we managed to crack the combination lock to a drawer which had a jar of paperclips in it, to which our reaction was, "Do we have to pick a lock?" And then later thinking, "Hey, I think these fit perfectly into the screws on the walls." Turns out the actual purpose of the paperclips was to make a chain to dangle into a tube to pick up a key. I can't remember if we had a magnet or hook to help with that. We found the tube with the key in it behind one of the pictures in the room that wasn't screwed down, and found the code to the combination lock on the drawer below the first one. Whoops! Escape room enthusiast here. We spent far more time than I care to admit trying to figure out what the heck the numbers written in Sharpie on the underside of a rug in the middle of the room meant. Turns out they were an inventory number from the thrift store the designer brought the thing from, and nobody else had ever noticed them before. We still won, but wasted a lot of our time. The second time I went to one, the owner told me that once a group decided to smash all the locks because they found a hammer on which a clue was written. They had to replace all the locks and it's now a toy hammer. I'd like to say those people were morons, but when we found it, the same idea was discussed in our group. Yeah, I mean honestly, as much as some of the people in these other stories seem very dumb indeed now, even a smart group might think that they're overthinking things when the intended solution is actually something as simple as break locks with smashy thing. It's a shame that they had to tone down the authenticity by replacing a real hammer with a plastic fantastic, though. Not absurd, but funny. I was at a heist-themed escape room over Christmas, which featured a bit where you have to maneuver past lasers and get a diamond. If you tripped the laser, the display case would close and you needed to go back to the start of the room to reset everything. After we finished the room, we were told about a group of 4 elderly women who just walked through the lasers and had one of the group stay at the beginning, resetting the trip. Absolute geniuses. I can just imagine it, the cackling as they broke the system. So I'm usually not cruel with my escapees. If I see them looking at the serial number for a prop, I usually send them a message saying they have a good eye, but it won't be relevant to the room. The biggest thing that happens is couples doing the room and fracturing under the slightest bit of pressure. I've legit had people break up in the room because they couldn't handle working through stress together. One time a couple said they were done and kept doing the room, which was extremely awkward for me, who was the poor sap who had to watch them for an hour. Most of the time, people are just plain stupid, which can be fun and frustrating depending on how people react to realizing it. It's very annoying when the people are cocky beforehand and then don't manage anything without a hint and somehow blame us for messing up. There have also been instances of people throwing up or trying to use the prop toilet inside one of the prison cells, but I think my favorite absurd thing was the one proposal I had while working at an escape room. You might think, well, isn't that romantic? And I thought so too, until I found out the escape rooms aren't just something that they both love, which made the proposal unique. It was their first room ever. They'd never played an escape game before in their lives. Weird choice of scenery to propose. Even weirder when you consider that they took 2 friends with them. But it doesn't end there. They barely managed to get out, and the ring was hidden in the very last queue, so if they hadn't managed, stuff would have become very awkward. It became that anyway because when he proposed, neither of their friends really reacted to it. They just stood there blankly, which was made even worse by the fact that the guy was supposed to film the whole thing, which he didn't. And the other girl didn't even know he was proposing, so the surprise at least should have coerced a smile out of her. Nothing. The proposal speech was also delivered with as much passion as a paper bag, and as it turned out, the guy just told everyone at the reception that he didn't really want to marry her. At least not for the time being, but she'd got pregnant, so now he was kind of pushed into it. She said yes, but holy crap, all of us watching were hoping she wouldn't. Now, imagine proposing, or even worse being proposed to in an escape room, knowing you're being watched and listened to through cameras. What an absurd choice to make. I was a player, and I was in a large cage. Through the bars, I had to open a heavy lock. The cage was dimly lit with LED bars on the floor. I got the lock open, but due to it being heavy and me having to handle it through the bars, I dropped it on the LED bar. At first, I thought the light turning off was part of the room. Turns out I broke the LED bar. One of them believed the clue was inside them. And not in the whole Disney kind of it was inside you all along way, they thought there was a physical clue stashed inside their person somehow. My dad owns an escape room in a small town in Norway, and the weirdest thing someone has done is probably trying to punch the camera. The guy was like 150 centimeters tall and couldn't reach it. After trying 3 times to punch it, he gave up. Not a worker, but I was with a group of people and one of them became so overwhelmed that almost immediately after walking in, they spun around and walked right back out again. I was the player in this story. There was a horror-themed escape house with people in costumes screaming at you from time to time with chainsaws and stuff. We were in a room with an open jail cage and we knew the next clue was in that cage. But it's pretty obvious that cage was designed to scare the crap out of whoever was inside. I waltzed in, the cage door slammed shut behind me, I took the note and slipped myself out between the bars. We waited for several minutes until I slipped back into the cage so the game could progress. Later on, the workers told us they were really surprised when I'd slipped out of their trap and were trying to figure out what to do next.
There's been a few. The idiots initially tried cutting through their chains. They finally worked it out, and one of them sawed through their leg and shot the other one with a revolver we'd left in there.
Damn, that's wild. They should make a movie about that. It was my first 10-year-old brother's birthday party, and children are dumb as frick. It was themed around a nuclear power station that was going to blow up the town, and essentially what happened was we had an hour to complete 3 rooms. We took 45 minutes to get through the first because kids kept throwing stuff around. One guy got freaked out thinking it was real and pressed the button to end the room. Thankfully it didn't work or something, and my dad shouted at him, so he threw a tantrum and literally locked himself inside a chest of drawers. Then, because kids can't organize crap, we had a hunt for the 3 most stressful minutes of my life for the key. Then we got through, and it was sort of okay from there because a lot of the kids just gave up and left the room. Never again. Never, ever again. What's a scary science fact that the public knows nothing about? Scientific literature's conclusion on Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases in general is that the diseases start decades before the first obvious symptoms, and that we need to treat them at this stage. When you exhibit obvious symptoms, it's too late and your brain is already mush. If you get diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 65, you've had the disease since your early 40s at least, and you experienced very mild symptoms but didn't notice it. And your brain fought like hell to compensate for the deficit. When you get diagnosed, your brain is already severely damaged and will never recover from the deficit. There's a gravitational anomaly in space called the Great Attractor, which is pulling everything within the Virgo and Hydra Centaurus superclusters towards it. It lies 150 to 250 million light-years from the Milky Way, which itself is being pulled towards it too. The scary part is that relative to us, this anomaly lies within the same plane as our own galaxy, making it very difficult to observe. Essentially, we have almost no concrete idea of what it is. On the flip side of the Great Attractor is the Boötes Void, which I find a bit creepy. The Boötes Void, sometimes called the Great Void, is a huge spherical region of space that contains very few galaxies. It's approximately 700 million light-years from Earth, and located near the constellation Boötes, which is how it got its name. The supervoid measures 250 million light-years in diameter, representing approximately 0.27% of the diameter of the observable universe, which itself is a daunting 93 billion light-years across. Its volume is estimated at 236,000 megaparsecs cubed, making it the largest known void in the universe. At first, astronomers were only able to find 8 galaxies across the expanse, but further observations revealed a total of 60 galaxies. Now, while that might still seem like a lot, it would be like stumbling upon only 60 objects across a region larger than the continental United States, and that's just in 2 dimensions. According to the astronomer Greg Aldering, the scale of the void is such that if the Milky Way had been in the center of the Boötes Void, we wouldn't have known that there were other galaxies until the 1960s. Looking at the volume of the Boötes Void, it should contain about 10,000 galaxies, when considering that the average distance between galaxies elsewhere in the universe is a few million light-years. But the question is, why and how this void came to be? There hasn't been enough time since the universe began for mere gravitational forces to clear out a space of that size. There's a theory which suggests that supervoids are caused by the intermingling of smaller mini-voids, like soap bubbles coming together. But a more, maybe creepier explanation is that the Boötes Void could be the result of an expanding Kardashev 3 scale civilization. As the colonization bubble expands outwards from its home system, the civilization dims each star and subsequently each galaxy it encounters by blanketing it in a Dyson shell. This might also explain why the void has such a nice spherical shape. Oh, and we're seeing a snapshot of the void 700 million years ago. A lot could have happened in the 700 million years that we just can't see or know of due to the inherent speed of light. Sweet dreams, everyone. Okay, so either there's a mega space empire just consuming suns for energy, and it could have done anything in the 700 million years since then, or that place is a barren nothingness for some other reason. I'm filing this right in my I don't want to think about it cabinet, thank you very much. If your dog swims in a lake after receiving a spot-on flea treatment, it absolutely decimates the invertebrate population. A large dog swimming in 8 Olympic swimming pools worth of water soon after treatment will leach enough neurotoxin to kill 50% of the lake's invertebrate population within 48 hours. There's some awareness of this, but it's not being taken seriously enough. I need to add, when I say after, I mean relatively soon after, within, say, a day, to have an effect quite this devastating. The leeching does reduce over the months, but it's still there, and the effect of multiple dogs still allows for a terrible buildup of chemicals. In 1958, a 7,600-pound nuclear bomb was lost off the Georgia coast near Savannah. It's never been found. Cancer geneticist here. Most cases of cancer that are sequenced generally just denote the prognosis or how long a patient has to live rather than treatment options. People always say, let's cure cancer, however, this simplifies cancer as though it's only one disease. It's far more complicated than that. I studied at one of the largest cancer hospitals in the world where the motto is to make cancer history, but the only obtainable goal is to make it chronic. We study and research as much as possible, but every cancer requires different research, and unfortunately the powers that be often prohibit funding and proficient research. It's work I'm passionate about, but also a broken system that's infuriating to work in. Most of the faults that are capable of causing large earthquakes have never actually been mapped. Of course, we have a very good idea of locations and gross geometry of most major plate boundaries, but each one is very complicated in detail. We can only see visible faults, those which outcrop at the surface or are well known from seismic data. There are many, many more that are completely buried, obscured by overlying faults or other complex geology. The public believes that we've acquired 3D seismic data over most of the planet, but that's only true in hydrocarbon-bearing basins. We're incredibly ignorant of the detailed structure of the Earth. I can recall a number of times reading a headline that says something like, "Major earthquake occurs on previously unknown fault." And if we understand so little about plate boundaries, what about intraplate areas? Some of the largest earthquakes on Earth occur far from plate boundaries and we know very little about them. Take the New Madrid fault system, for example. Certainly we know where it is, but we have very little understanding of its detailed geometry and kinematics, or how the rocks move. Without that, it's almost impossible to predict anything. Sleep tight, folks! The entire explosive output from Little Boy, which is the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, came from just over half a gram of matter being converted into energy. The mass of a butterfly exploding with the force of 15,000 tons of TNT. Anthrax can sporulate in dirt and stay viable for hundreds of years until the soil is disturbed and the spores are inhaled. Oh, I've got a triple whammy for you. First, rabies. Once symptomatic, rabies has a 100% fatality rate. The only options are the rabies vaccine and immunoglobulin therapy, which, again, must be administered before any symptoms. Second, gamma ray bursts, henceforth referred to as GRBs. GRBs are a rare phenomenon emitted from the poles of rapidly spinning supernovae and hypernovae. In the event of a direct hit from a suitably close, which is really far, source, all life on Earth would be wiped out. The facing side would be annihilated instantly, while the trailing side would quickly die due to conditions on Earth no longer being suitable to support life, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about it. And third, runaway global warming. There are many stores of greenhouse gases, namely carbon dioxide and methane, all over the place, but the conditions required to keep these gases trapped are delicate. And the worst part? It may already be too late to stop, even if humanity immediately ceased all greenhouse gas emissions and put every single resource we have into carbon sequestration. In the UK, about 17% of people have fetal alcohol syndrome. As much as 17% of us are developmentally disabled simply because prior to the late 90s, a large proportion of British mothers drank during pregnancy. 41% if surveys are to be believed. Thankfully, the prevalence rate has been falling fast since the late 90s when all of this research was published, but it's terrifying to see how much of an effect FASD is having on society. Small asteroids are hard to detect, but can still cause massive damage to towns. Hearing is supposedly one of the last senses to fade upon death based on EEG or brainwave recordings. Oh, damn it! So you're telling me when I lean in next to the ear of my enemies and whisper, "I'll see you in hell," they might in fact actually be waiting for me? I was not prepared to have to face up to my own words. That's so awkward. So, how do I put this delicately? Insects are going extinct. We've lost a significant chunk just since the 80s. I think it was about 20%. Mozzies are going up, of course, but just about everything else is going down. It wasn't until I read this that I realized as a kid in the 90s I used to see butterflies all the time. Dragonflies too. My house used to get invaded by Christmas beetles every year. Not so much anymore. These days I might only see 1 or 2 Christmas beetles in December, if any at all. When I was a kid, I remember finding 8 in my house in a single night, same house. The Cascadia subduction zone runs off the coast of northern California to southern Canada and ruptures about every 250 to 350 years. We know this from the geologic records. The last rupture was January 1700, and there are written records from Japan of a tsunami that resulted from the earthquake on the other side of the Pacific. This zone is still active and is likely to rupture in the next 100 years, resulting in a magnitude 9 or higher earthquake that impacts the west coast from northern Cali to southern Canada. Prions. Misfolded proteins that cause a cascade of protein misfoldings that lead to amyloid plaque buildups, resulting in uncontrollable neurodegeneration that's fatal in 100% of cases within 2 years. There's no cure. We don't understand what causes it, we don't understand the mechanism of the misfolding cascade. We don't even fully understand the structure of the misfolded proteins. It could happen in theory to anyone at any time, and there's no way to tell until you start showing symptoms, at which point you might have 18 months to live, if you're lucky, the last 6 of which will be intensely unpleasant. Some forms of anesthesia don't actually numb you to the pain, they make you forget that you felt it. That reminds me that early anesthetic for children didn't stop pain, it just paralyzed the kids. The doctors just didn't believe the kids describing the pain, and it wasn't until a child of a doctor was able to recount in detail the medical procedure and how he was cut up and what caused the pain that they stopped using it. This is all from memory from a college neuroscience class, so I don't recall the specifics. If you live long enough, your chances of getting dementia are 100%. My biochem professor used to remind us that no matter how healthy you are, you will die of cancer or you will die of dementia. At a certain point, your body just begins to shut down. I don't know if I'd call it science per se, or myself a scientist, but I am a former funeral director, and one of the first things you learn in your actual funeral sciences class is that people over a certain body fat percentage will start a literal grease fire in your crematory oven if you don't bake them at the proper temperature and duration. Cold start, low and slow is the key. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. There were once sea scorpions the size of a great white shark. You wouldn't melt like Gollum if you fell in lava, you'd lie on top of it, burning and evaporating. You'd die fast though, so that's cool. Everyone knows about scurvy, but the reason it's so terrifying is usually less well known. You see, scar tissue is not permanent. The process to build and maintain scar tissue is constantly ongoing. When you become vitamin C deficient, your scar tissue starts being reabsorbed by your body, opening up any and all old wounds. If you've ever had surgery, those internal incisions will open back up. Fortunately, it doesn't take a lot of vitamin C and it's abundant in our food sources. But it's still a little creepy that you could just start falling apart without it. On the flip side, too much vitamin C can lead to stomach cancer. Vitamin C is basically citric acid, and eating a ton of acid regularly is bad. We don't fully know how general anesthesia works. I knew that general anesthesia caused sleeping issues, but the reason why is weird. I attended an animal behavior conference a few years ago that included a lady talking about general anesthetic and bees. The bees had complex time structures and would normally do certain things at certain times of the day. Those given anesthesia had their body clocks shifted by the time that they were under, like that period just didn't exist for them. Their whole body clock was paused, completely different to if they'd been sleeping. Apparently, the same is true for humans. Here's a few scary medical facts regarding CPR that you won't often hear in your first aid or CPR class put on in school. I only learned this stuff after schooling to become an EMT. What's the success rate of CPR? The average person assumes it's 75% or greater. In reality, it's barely 10%. It's one of the first things they told us in training because all new people have way too high of an expectation of the effectiveness of CPR. It can be very depressing when you're doing everything you were trained to and aren't getting the results you think you should be getting. The time from collapse to administration of a shock via AED is absolutely paramount. They say the chances of survival drop 10% per minute. Oh, and rescue breaths. If you're not being very, and I mean very careful, you'll cause gastric dissension. You'll literally be blowing up their stomach and they will vomit. Then there are the cracks and crackles. If done right, it'll sound and feel like you're breaking every rib in little old lady Nelson's chest. You're likely not, it's cartilage and other bits shifting. Although if you're a bit too vigorous, you may very well break a rib or two, but hey, they're already dead, so it doesn't matter. They'd rather be alive with a broken rib than dead. Maybe it's just the sort of movies I watch, but I was under no illusions about the effectiveness of CPR. Most of the action flicks I see have someone administering it, not working, and then them bringing their fist down with a vigorous bout of swearing at the end. But it's normally not anyone important who's died in the film, so silver lining. Soil science adjacent researcher here. We're degrading, polluting, and losing our topsoil at such a rate that we may not be able to produce enough food to feed everyone within 50 or 60 years, let alone what impacts climate change might bring to bear on our food supply. And the US government's crop insurance programs and incentives all reinforce the bad practices, while discouraging regenerative practices. These bad policies are extremely hard to change because of lobbying from the major agribusiness companies who make money off these short-sighted policies. Our food supply is further threatened by our agricultural overdependence on aquifer water, which is not being replenished, making it an unsustainable source of water. If the aquifers are overdrawn, depleted, or polluted, we hit a hard wall of water scarcity and will have no backups to address the problem with. The drawdown of the aquifers also causes land subsidence, which causes costly infrastructure and building damage. The general public doesn't realize the impending crisis that will be caused by the confluence of these factors. We keep our dangerous bacteria species in a college campus's fridge, protected by one single lock with one power cord. You know, despite what advertising tells you, it's really hard to claim something is scientifically proven. Why? Proving causality is complicated and expensive. Better yet, if you ever hear the word proven, there's a 100% chance that academia and science were not involved. There is a forest of trees that are all genetically identical and connected at the roots, and is considered the largest organism on Earth. I'm pretty sure it was the inspiration behind IDOWorkHereLady in AITA. If you live in the Netherlands and your house is older than, say, 100 years, and you haven't renovated your plumbing, chances are fairly high that you can get lead poisoning. It's impossible for water treatment companies to pinpoint where they are and how many, and many building plans don't include the plumbing schematics, so check your pipes for lead. They do harm, especially to children. Phosgene gas is a gas whose lethal dose is 5 times the detection threshold, which is when you can smell it. And it smells like freshly cut grass, supposedly. This is super important if you're a welder or amateur welder. Don't use brake cleaner on rusted metal if you intend to weld it. Welders use electrical currents to create arcs which superheat metal. If there's brake cleaner or residue on the metal, it'll create enough phosgene gas to kill you instantly. Wire wheels exist for a reason. Use them. Most cosmetic items that say they contain ingredients like different plant extracts have just enough to say it's in there but not enough to actually help you, like a few grams in a batch that's a couple of thousand gallons. If it isn't an FDA-regulated component, like for example salicylic acid in a shampoo for people with dandruff, there's literally nothing stopping companies from putting virtually undetectable amounts of the ingredients into stuff just to be able to say it's there. Grass-fed beef is the same sort of scam. The USDA only requires a cow to have eaten grass a single time in its entire life to earn the label. Nearly everything we can measure on Earth is contaminated with particles of microplastic. Topsoil loss is pretty scary for the medium to long term. We're burning through soil in the Midwest much faster than other parts of the US. Interestingly enough, a lot of the damage from the Dust Bowl is still in place, but we're relying on more input-intensive methods to eke out results. Fertilizer runoff is also causing a giant anoxic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. The nutrients feed algae, which has a population explosion and rots en masse. Some are holding out for usable soil opening up at high latitudes, like in Canada or Siberia with climate change, but at least near-term, that doesn't seem too promising, given that it will be generally poor soil with less phosphate, and melting permafrost won't be too reliable for quite a while. While vertical farming and the like is making advances, as I understand it, most of what's practical to grow tends to be inefficient calorie-wise. Antibiotics have been overused and misused for so long that various bacteria strains have started to get resistant to them. What used to be a treatable infection might soon become deadly because we're unable to treat it with the antibiotics we have today. There's research to try and find other ways to treat antibiotic-resistant bacteria, but until then, please use prescribed antibiotics until they're finished, not until you feel better. If unused, don't flush them down the toilet or put them in the bin, give them to a pharmacy so they can discard them correctly, and use antibiotics when necessary, because some countries will give them willy-nilly while others are more conservative. Man, we really can't win, can we? Here I thought we'd effectively developed a process for neutering certain formerly dangerous conditions, when really we're just forcing them to go away for a while, unionize, and come back as something bigger and more deadly. There's a solar event known as CME, or coronal mass ejection. It occurs very frequently on a cosmic timescale. Every few decades to centuries, there's a decent-sized one. Why are they so scary? A CME is a massive burst of radiation, easily able to fully envelop the Earth in its path, and it's the equivalent of a non-stop EMP barrage. The last time a big one hit Earth was when we had telegraph lines for communications and they spontaneously caught fire. In today's world, with everything running on electricity, when the next big one hits, we'll have at most a few days' warning, and it'd be a literal apocalypse movie scenario, with planes going down due to their whole electrical systems frying, nobody's vehicles starting, untold billions in fire damage wreaking havoc everywhere, and the machines we depend on to help would be similarly fried. Some stuff would be unaffected, being parked in deep concrete-roofed parking garages, and the like, but our entire infrastructure would be useless for years. It would literally send us into a mini dark age while people tried to get things working again. Recovery would take decades to centuries. If you look up and see an asteroid in the sky about to hit the Earth, you have about 1 second to react. The coronavirus was not surprising nor unexpected by people working in public health, and it's not the worst-case scenario by any means. Ironically, the success of public health has been so dramatic over the past 150 years that politicians and the general public forget how important it is, and how much authority government officials have in a public health crisis. Humans rely on evaporating sweat to stay cool. If humidity gets too high, relatively low heat can kill humans. The equivalent of 95 degrees Fahrenheit or 35 degrees Celsius at 100% relative humidity can kill even healthy humans. This is called a wet bulb effect. By 2050, scientists predict multiple wet bulb events in the North China Plain. Approximately 400 million people live in the North China Plain. Helium. Fun for party balloons. Everyone likes a squeaky voice, except helium is a vital component of various high-tech devices, such as MRIs. Helium is also light enough that the Earth's gravity can't contain it, and we are running out. Not today, not tomorrow, but we are frivolously wasting it when we should be jealously hoarding it, and eventually we won't have any left, and a lot of our wonderful technology will suddenly stop working. The only thing stopping genetic manipulation on humans is legislation. The human genome is riddled with mutations. Some were passed down from your parents, some occur during DNA replication, and others as a result of DNA damage from the environment, like smoking, UV lights, stuff like that. Most of them are harmless. Some will be repaired, and some won't, but others will be cancer suppressor genes or oncogenes. In fact, you may have cancerous cells growing in your body right now. During World War II, when America was working on the first nuclear bombs, they hadn't finalized the maths on whether or not a nuclear explosion would cause an ongoing reaction with the atmosphere, thereby igniting it and eradicating Earth. Another nuclear fact for you: the original nuclear bombs leveled the cities they detonated over, yet are considered puny by today's standards. The most powerful bomb ever created, the Tsar Bomber, had an explosive yield 3,000 times more powerful than the original nuclear bombs, and its power was calculated to be more than 10 times the combined power of every single munition used in World War II. That includes every bullet fired, every grenade thrown, every artillery shell fired, every bomb dropped, and of course, the 2 nuclear bombs dropped as well. It was detonated 4 kilometers from the ground over the remote Sverny Islands, yet still completely destroyed towns within a couple of 100 kilometers of the blast and broke windows as far away as Copenhagen, Denmark. The shockwave from the blast circled the globe 9 times. The plane that dropped it was given a 50-50 chance of survival. Yet the bomb was originally designed to be twice as powerful. 94% of the universe is completely out of our reach forever. An electric current of only 20 megaamps is enough to stop your heart and kill you. Under the right conditions, even a 9-volt battery can be lethal. Botox is made from botulinum toxin. This toxin is produced by the bacterium Clostridium botulinum and is considered to be one of the most poisonous, lethal substances known to mankind. The toxin is a neurotoxin that blocks nerve signals to muscles. Consequently, it prevents muscles injected with Botox from contracting or tensing, so they become weak or paralyzed, thus improving the appearance of wrinkles and fine lines. Fortunately though, Botox is only injected in small, targeted doses, and is considered extremely safe as long as it's made and provided by a licensed professional. What's the craziest thing an undercover cop had to do to not blow their cover? My friend who was an undercover cop said that multiple times he had to let himself be arrested to not blow it. Like when a sting was going down or whatever, instead of being like, "Hey, I'm a cop," he'd be arrested along with everyone else. Former jailer from a large metro department here, we'd be notified that someone was undercover coming in from a raid, but other than that, they were to be treated just the same as any other arrest. We'd keep an eye on them on camera to ensure safety by watching for potential scraps and stuff. We'd do the same for any number of scenarios and people. Our goal was generally to spot and stop fights before they became physical anyways. But we were usually told ahead of time when an undercover came in so that nobody went, "Hey Smith, how did you get arrested, man? Crap, your sergeant's gonna be mad." That kind of thing. My cousin was an undercover ATF agent. Anyway, they were trying to bust some guys for illegal alcohol distribution and were building a rapport by going undercover. My cousin doesn't take his ATF badge with him when he's undercover because if anyone saw it, he'd be done for. Anyway, some hot-headed black and white cops came over and started getting in their faces. My cousin couldn't blow his cover, but pretty soon the police started getting physical and they beat the crap out of my cousin and the guys he was trying to get evidence from. They take them all into the police station only to find out that my cousin is in fact ATF. He was livid because cops aren't supposed to beat people up generally. He's currently filing a lawsuit against that police department. I worked as a transcriptionist for a while, and I transcribed some tape taken off the body mics of undercover officers working for a very notorious domestic terror case. It was crazy. They'd sound like an absolute backwards hillbilly lunatic while talking to their marks, and then later when talking to other police officers, they'd sound all businesslike and very professional. My friend used to be a state trooper. She told me about how she'd used to have to go undercover as a working girl to try and catch Johns. She didn't do so well though. She was far too polite, so they all knew something was up. My dad was police for more than 30 years. One year we were driving by a street corner and he goes, "I thought they were cleaning up this area. That was a working girl." It never crossed my mind. I just never paid attention to that stuff, so I said, "How could you tell she was a working girl?" He pointed out her general look, which was ragged, and dress, as well as, of course, working the corner. Then he added, "That's pretty much what real working girls look like. If they've got 2 arms, 2 legs, and all their teeth, they're probably an undercover cop." Honestly, this is one of those things that the narrator would never have suspected that people would go undercover as. There you have it, folks. Be careful who you solicit. Oh, wait, probably don't solicit people. Unless it's legal in your country, maybe just don't do it. When I first got started in forensics, it was when chat rooms and webcams were taking off. So, pervs thought they'd be able to figure out who was on the internet, since clearly you'll know you're webcamming from a 40-year-old dude munching on donuts instead of a high schooler. I was a naive 18-year-old woman who was just getting started in policing, doing some clerical work for my hometown police department, when I heard a couple of people talking about how they were having a hard time chatting up creeps now that webcams were a thing. I told them, why not just hire someone to act like an underage person and coach them on what to say and how to set up meetings to catch these buttholes. And lo and behold, I'd volunteered myself for the job. We set up a bedroom in one of the upstairs offices, complete with a bed, a desk, and some posters from one of the officer's teenage daughters. I had to wear some of my high school sports clothes or pajamas while talking to these awful people via webcam. I passed notes back and forth with a team of officers and passed it off as trying to do homework while chatting. The hardest part was to still seem interested and innocent while this guy on the screen was telling me what kind of horrible things he wants to do to me under the presumptions he's making. We netted somewhere around 120 men and a handful of women. The most notable was a few clergy, 2 city councilmen, a state trooper, school teachers, and other people you'd just trust around kids. All of them looked like regular people and seemed like people I'd interact with every day without any idea of what they were doing at night in front of their computer. Was there anyone that got away? Yeah, a few of them never showed up, but there was only one that got away that I just know went after a real victim or had already done so already. That really made me worried. He would try and chat off and on when I was on, and he got a thrill off of telling me how he'd like to tie me up and do all sorts of obscene things in great detail. I actually started crying and he just laughed and said it would be fine after I got used to it. I don't regret doing this work, but it was quite the mind frick, especially at 18 years old. Regarding entrapment, we got around it because it didn't actually apply with the way we were doing things. I never actually went into chat rooms and solicited people via text or webcam. I didn't have to solicit anyone. They were literally just waiting in the chat rooms ready to pounce. What usually happened was I would log in with a girly or teenagery handle, and people would start sending private chat requests before I could even post hello on the chat feed. We often had so many that sometimes we had to let a few of them go because there were just too many for me to try and talk to or type with. So we never actually tried to get them to talk to me. Oftentimes we couldn't get them to shut up. Once they got going, they had no inhibitions at all. If you go look up a teen chat, make up a cute handle and just post saying hi, you will get swarmed with weirdos trying to chat you up or get you to cam with them. I don't recommend doing it because it will destroy any faith you have left in humanity. As a former correctional officer, we had a situation where a major police department planted a cop in prison to get information on a guy they believed was orchestrating hits from inside the prison. The warden knew, and I knew by accident, but not a single other correctional officer knew, nor did any of the staff, including medical, and that's the way they wanted it. He went through receiving, he was categorized and placed, it was wild. He was there for a week, got the info they needed, and got him out. It didn't become public knowledge that he was undercover until after I'd left, and it was a long while after as they were making a case. It was a surreal moment. My father worked for NCIS. He told me about an incident where his guys set up a sting to bust some substance suppliers, who turned out to be local police setting up their own sting. They figured it out when they tried to bust each other. I know a guy who went undercover as a junkie. He was committed. He'd stop showering for a while before a gig and pee on his tracksuit before going into work. He was so good that he managed to get the same dealer convicted twice in the space of a year, and they never suspected he was the rat. He had multiple police records under different names as well. One time, a Homeland Security officer came up to my house undercover, flashed his badge and asked if he could come in. Once he was in, he pulled out a piece of paper with my neighbor's face on it. He asked if I'd seen him around lately. When I asked what he did and let him know I haven't seen him around, he told me what he was wanted for. It would be shorter to list the really dark crimes he wasn't wanted for. Seriously, it was worse than you could imagine. Turns out he did all manner of unspeakable things to his own family, and once he found out he was wanted, he went back to El Salvador. I thought they only flashed their badges in the movies, but turns out that crap is real. So this guy appears out of nowhere and befriends a relative of mine who was involved in illegal stuff. The guy was very friendly and just down to party. He had money, he paid for product, everything. He'd drop in on parties and even allegedly hooked up with a few of the working girls. Then he placed an order much larger than before. A few weeks later, a relative of mine is arrested and is currently in prison. So the craziest thing an undercover cop had to do to keep their cover? Buy substances and go to brothels. A guy my mum dated for a long time was an undercover cop. Older guy in his 70s, he was fresh out of the academy and at the Asbury Park riots. Sad, scary stuff. And then was an undercover narcotics cop for 14 years during the 70s and 80s with the NJSP. He was Puerto Rican and spoke Spanish, an ex-Marine, and became a state trooper. They utilized his ability to blend in with organized crime in the Latin community. He had to do lines in front of a bunch of guys during a buy one night and basically stuck his knife in and blew a mound up his nose. Then he started having a minor paranoia or panic attack that they were going to find out he was a cop thanks to the gram of stuff he just took to the dome. He was breathing heavy and went out for air, his heart was pounding out of his chest, he was panicking over how to get out of it. One of the gangsters came outside to talk to him, he was ready to run or fight, and the guy goes, "Man, I've never seen someone snort so much at once, man. You're alright?" He sighs a huge sigh of relief and was like, "Yeah, I never did that much. I'm having trouble breathing." The guy was real nice, brought him a drink, and they smoked together. Everyone was joking that he had a heart of a lion to take that much. He actually felt bad about locking that one guy up when it all went down. I think he said he tried to help him out or get a reduced sentence or something, and he has other stories. A guy that worked with me was going to this biker bar frequently to get in the gang. It was substance-related. He didn't want to get hammered and do something stupid, so he'd take his beers into the bathroom with him, dump out half, and fill them with water. Drinking watered-down beer is the real crime here. That stuff is gross. Nice try, crime lord. I imagine there are numerous substance dealers and cartel leaders anxiously waiting for responses to this question. Just waiting. Hey! If you're a criminal, and you're watching this video, look away. This isn't for you. Go watch a video about how to be caught peacefully and minimize collateral damage or something. I remember a few years ago in Seattle, people were complaining because cops took months to do an undercover investigation at an exotic dance club to determine if the women were working girls. Apparently, this investigation entailed going to these clubs a lot, drinking beer and trying to get the women there to do things for money other than dance. They proudly announced several of the women were working girls and the club was shut down. I found an article about the club being busted. The dancers were cited for 18 counts of illegal touching during lap dances, 16 counts of off-stage undress, which is prohibited, 18 counts of accepting money for illegal acts, and 4 counts of, well, being a working girl. All of these are misdemeanors. The manager was cited for reckless managerial conduct, a misdemeanor, for allegedly being aware of illegal activity and taking no action. Meanwhile, violent crime was increasing, and 3rd and Pine was an open-air substance market. So yeah, these guys were clearly picking and choosing their jobs. They also did stings at a bikini barista stand by driving up to the window with a 20 sticking out of their fly. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My dad went undercover for several years and talked about a crystal head that he hung out with all the time and even babysat her kids while she went out to get strung out. This went on for several months while they were figuring out who the big dealer was and were acquiring warrants. He grew a beard, had a fake ID, drove an old crappy car. Eventually, they got warrants to bust a bunch of people in the ring, and he was actually a part of the SWAT team at the time and was part of the group that smashed in the doors and arrested her and a bunch of others in the area. He had to wear a balaclava to protect his identity when with the SWAT team. He said it was actually really difficult because he had become an important part of those kids' lives and was kind of attached to them, and now they had no mother and had to be taken to Child Protective Services. I never got to ask him more questions about this before he passed, but I have no idea how he balanced his crazy second life and then came home and acted like a normal husband and father to our family. My cousin, whose Secret Services, acted like a smack addict homeless beggar and a semi-crazy Muslim religious salesman owning a stall for surveillance purposes. I've gone undercover online to infiltrate the worst sort of illegal creeps and pervs in their dealings. Nothing too intense, but I had to interact with suspects online or over the phone who were frickin' sick in the head and acted like it wasn't the most vile stuff in the world. I had to play dead on Mount Everest once. My code name was Green Boots. I fell prey to an undercover operation. I feel obligated to preface this with how amazed I was at how integrated this guy was in our gang. If giving an Oscar-worthy performance is the standard, I'd have to say I'm pretty impressed by what you guys can do. Over the course of several months, this cop earned our trust. Heck, at one point I would have said that I trusted this man more than my own brother, who was also in the gang. To be fair though, I caught my brother stealing product from us more than once, but at least I trusted him to not directly destroy my livelihood. Suffice to say, this cop's acting skill was the #1 factor that led to us getting busted. The guy, let's call him Dave, was absolutely fearless and tough as nails. One of our initiation rituals involved letting members of our gang wail on you for 3 minutes with no holding back. If you were still breathing afterwards, you were in. After getting pummeled to the ground by 7 or 8 different men, Dave wasn't just alive. It was almost as if he enjoyed it. He was probably smiling because he got his foot in the door, now that I think of it. To get the craziest thing Dave did, I need to explain how our gang functioned. We start off being referred to as a number, both to protect identity and as a form of putting lower-ranked members in their place. Names had to be earned. We didn't exactly have a set criteria for earning a name, but members often had to bring in enough income for the gang, earn the leader's trust, and then commit various violent acts for the benefit of the group before a name was even considered. All names followed the same theme, astronomy. Our leader was known as Vega. The day Dave earned his name, Vega had him as a getaway driver for a group of members. Their job was to sneak into a rival dealer's house, steal his product, and then escape in Dave's car. As they were making their getaway, someone opened fire on the vehicle and Dave took a round to the forearm. Without even slowing down, he managed to get our guys back to the house using one arm to drive. After his arrival, Vega and I rushed him to the ER as he sat there, holding a jacket against the wound, trying to control his breathing. Within the next day, he had made a full recovery. Once Dave got back, everyone showered him with gratitude and praised his awesomeness. Vega approached him with a name tag in his hand and pinned it to Dave's shirt, signifying that he'd earned his right to be known as something more than a number. Sirius. I don't hold any grudges against him for putting us behind bars. That guy saved my life one time. Wherever you are, man, thank you. You changed who I was for the better in the end. I'll never forget the time you earned your Sirius tag, though. My cousin worked undercover in the biker community. He was really into working out and bodybuilding, so he managed to convince everyone that he treated his body like a temple and didn't drink, do substances, or eat like crap. That wasn't very far from the truth, so it wasn't too hard for him to play the part. He's also a former Marine sharpshooter, so he was tough as nails and pretty heavily tattooed, so he definitely gave off a "don't F with me" vibe. I did work for the liquor board in the city next to my town, busting bars for underage drinking. When I'd get served, I'd have to text the officer in charge and he'd come in and take my picture with the drink and then fine the bar, typically a few $100s, and the bar would get a strike. 3 strikes and they lost their liquor license. When I would get served, I wasn't allowed to drink any alcoholic beverages. Only once did I actually have to drink the drink served to me. I was at a sketchy biker bar and they're known for underage drinking and already had 2 strikes. They're also known for getting rough with the informants, like some employees and patrons attacking kids from 18 to 20. So I walked in and asked for a Budweiser, and I showed him my real ID and he serves me my beer. Before I could even pull out my phone, the bartender grabbed my wrist and asked me if I worked for the liquor board. I told him no, and he says, "Okay then, chug your beer." So I slam the bottle of Bud and he lets me go and then tells me, "I've got my eye on you, boy," and gets me another Bud. I then take a Snapchat of me at the bar with my drink and hightail it out of there. I then show the picture to the officer and tell everything that happened, and he heads to the bar and ends up fining them and the bartender and giving them their last strike. They ended up taking everything to court and I got called in as a witness. I had to testify in court everything that had happened. The bar lost the case, and when I was walking out to my car, the owner yelled to me, "Hey kid, watch yourself. You'll get what's coming to you." So far, nothing has happened to me. This happened about 3 years ago, so I don't think anything will happen to me. And I'm getting a lot of hate in the comments, people calling me scum and degenerate, so here's something that'll make you even more angry. I wasn't even getting paid to do it either. Well, on the one hand, you're clearly the definition of a narc, but you also absolutely have a massive set on you and you weren't doing it for your own benefit, so honestly, kind of respect. We do have these laws for a reason, so even though this seems kind of obnoxious, I think it was a net good. City Cop here. We don't do too much long-term undercover, but our general orders have a policy covering the use of substances on duty in certain circumstances. While it doesn't specify that we can do substances, it states that if we consume them, we have to immediately respond to our department's health clinic for documentation and treatment. I must have been 15 when one day the doorbell rang and I opened the door to 2 guys looking very much like real tough street guys. They showed me their badges and asked for my mum or dad. Turned out they wanted to stake out a public playground behind our garden that was used by some dealers for their mules. Those are the people who drink very large amounts of water and chuck up little packages with some substances in them. There was a multi-story bank near the playground, but the bank didn't want anything to do with it. So they asked my parents whether they could set up a surveillance team on our terrace for a couple of days. My parents allowed it, and my mum prepared food for those guys all week long. I think cops at least do some blow. The easiest way to prove you're not a cop is to take some illegal substances. Then they just make sure the court date is far enough away that the officer has clean pee if he's accused of doing so. In college, I took a few criminal justice classes. Our professor, who I'll call Bob, was a cop for 15 or so years and had gone undercover in the 80s for a very long time. Bob was a biker as a hobby, and he was sent undercover to break up a substance ring in the biker community. Bob arranged to buy some crystal from some guy, and shortly after the buy, the dealer was arrested. The dealer's sister started telling everyone that she thought Bob was a cop, and some of the other bikers started asking him questions. So a day or so after the sister started accusing Bob of being a narc, the entire group was at a bar. Bob told a few of the guys to meet him outside in a few minutes, and Bob told the sister he had some crystal for her and to come outside. When they finally got out of there, Bob told her, "Where I'm from, friends don't call friends narcs." And then he beat the crap out of her in front of the entire group. He kicked her as hard as he could between her legs, which, while not as painful if you're a woman, still hurts. Then he said he punched her 4 or 5 times in the face, hard. He said he didn't want to do it, but after he did that, no one accused him of being a cop ever again. Oof. I was once the gardener for a cop who worked undercover to identify pimps and extract people who were being exploited against their will. She retired early due to mental health issues, likely stemming from substance use during her time undercover. To keep cover, she'd do substances that were being offered or used. Of course, things spiraled out of control for her, and suddenly she was on permanent paid leave and stayed in the house most days hiding from the world. So for her, what she did to keep cover is offer up her sanity in exchange for some successful arrests. I used to be the night manager of an adult toy shop. A drunk vice cop and his lady came in late at night, and the vice cop proceeded to brag about how he'd been part of the team that helped recently shut down a local exotic dance club. Every Friday, the chief would hand him and his partner each $1,000 in cash and send them to the club with instructions to do whatever they could to try and buy favors and smack. Apparently their first few trips were a dud, But after a while, the one in the store was able to cajole one of the girls into giving him a down-under kiss. He splooged and then flashed the badge before she could even swallow. He then proceeded to demand to use our bathroom. I told him, no dice. Public restrooms and adult retail is a bad combination for everyone. He said he was a cop, and I told him that was completely irrelevant. He protested by peeing his pants in my store and telling me that I made him do it before storming out with his lady. In short, if you live in Butler County, Ohio, 2,000 of your tax dollars are spent weekly on table dances and favors for idiotic motherfrickin' brochiopaths who aren't even housebroken. Way to serve and protect, butthead. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.